Okay, folks, we're going to go ahead and gavel this meeting to order. Got a couple of comments to cover, but first, I think we should probably do a roll call, Mr. Co-Chair.
Yes, are we live?
We are live.
We're
Mr.
live.
Chairman.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, this is roll call for the Select Committee on Blockchain for September 11th. Senator Ellis. Senator Furphy. Senator Nethercott. Representative Andrew. Representative Singh. Representative Yin.
Here.
Mr. Kaufman.
Here.
Mr. Pope.
Here.
Mr. Revel.
Here.
Co-Chairman Rothfuss.
Here.
Chairman Western. You have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner House, I think Representative Singh is on his way. Maybe just got trouble parking. So let's just leave that roll call open until he gets here. So thank you all so much for being here, folks online. Couple of brief things we need to cover, just standard legislative procedure, just about decorum. Obviously, speak through the chair. If you are a member of the audience or online, obviously, let's try to stay calm here and not try to create any distractions. And we've always done a pretty good job with this committee and keep putting it straightforward, but obviously let's keep our discussion civil and those kind of things. I will personally note that we are having a committee meeting during archery season, which I find an egregious offense, but I'm willing to let that go. Yeah.
But you're already done. You're done. You're
Well,
already done.
I still have my elk tag to fill and my whitetail tag. Oh, we can go on and on. So I think first up is University of Wyoming. Mr. Lupien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Honorable members of the Wyoming Select Committee. My name is Steve Lupien. I am the director of the University of Wyoming Center for Blockchain and Digital Innovation. I want to start out by thanking you for your dedication to technology and financial innovation. This committee's forward-thinking blockchain legislation not only sets Wyoming apart, but establishes Wyoming as a digital economy leader and sets a benchmark for others. So I want to thank you for that. I just want to give first a few updates about blockchain efforts on campus since my last report, and then President Seidel and Executive Director Gabrielle Allen has asked me to speak a little bit on behalf of the AI efforts that the Blockchain Center and the university are engaging in. So first of all, this is a very important week for blockchain here on campus. This is our 6th annual blockchain stampede. And this year we're calling it a build-a-thon as opposed to a hackathon, because we are now involving other activities around how to start your company in blockchain. We have a Shark Tank type of competition. We just thought it was more appropriate, and we'll continue to do the hackathon portion as well. For the 6th straight year, we have a distinguished MC by the name of Tyler Lindholm. Many of you may know him. And on Thursday, Governor Mark Gordon and President Seidel will be hosting our blockchain lunch, and I encourage you all to join us if you can. It'll be in the upstairs of the Union, so please join us for that. Additionally, some of our keynote speakers are Hester Peers from the SEC, Dr. Alan Day, who is an Air Force 2-star general, who is a logistics expert. Caitlin Long will be speaking, who happens to be one of the University of Wyoming's distinguished alums this year. And our capstone speaker will be Charles Hoskinson from IOG, who graces us every year. Can I ask Mr. Lindholm to join us up here since we're talking about the Stampede?
Mr. Lindholm, please, if you would
allow it.
I think we'll allow it this time, but just this time.
Just this time. So I just introduced what was going on with the Stampede. Mr. Lindholm, would you like to add anything?
Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Mr. Lindholm, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is our 6th year, as I'm sure Mr. Lupian mentioned. It's a big deal based on what we've been able to accomplish with the Wyoming Hackathon. We've got kids from Upton. They're going to be here competing for their 3rd year in a row. And there's kids from all over the state that come in and do this deal. So it's a really big deal. And a lot of them really look towards your work and what you've been able to accomplish to attract these businesses into the state, because ultimately, at the end of the day, that might be their future job. So it's really pretty exciting. And I hope you guys will stick around and join us on the 14th and 15th, free concert, 9 and the 15th.
We'll get there in a minute.
So I hope you'll join us in these activities.
A couple of new things.
Mr. Lupien, go ahead,
I'm
please.
sorry, Mr. Chairman. A couple of new things this year are we are adding an esports component to the Stampede. On Friday will be a campus-wide esport competition. And then on Saturday, the University of Wyoming's esports team will be competing against Colorado, Air Force, and CSU. So there is now intercollegiate esports that will be taking place in the Union. And I said Air Force. Did I say Chair Force? Okay.
But it's careful.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
That's enough. Thank you very much. Air Force, please, Mr. Lupien, go ahead.
And as Mr. Lindholm alluded to, we have our concerts, free concerts Friday night, indoor practice field. And this year it will be Travis Denning, who is a up and coming country western star who has had at least one #1 hit on the charts. So it should be a pretty big event. So that is all this week. Moving on, Mr. Chairman, a couple other things I wanted to give updates on. First is the status
Mr.
of
Chairman?
Mr. Co-Chair.
Where will that be? We obviously know, but anybody who's listening, anybody
Yes.
who needs to know where to go and how to get involved, how would they do that?
Yes, certainly if you simply Google a WYO Hackathon or Blockchain Stampede, you will be able to get to our page where you can register and you can see the agenda. And it will be held upstairs in the Union this year in the Union ballrooms. So pretty accessible to everyone on campus, Mr. Co-Chair. Thank you.
Please proceed.
I wanted to give a quick update on the ARPA grant that the Blockchain Center received. If you recall, this was a grant to create a blockchain education program. And I'm happy to announce that all the curriculum has been created, and we are now piloting that program with a few high schools through the Wyoming Department of Education, as well as Western Community College. So next report I give, I should have more information on how that program is being received. But I certainly want to thank all your support on that. The Blockchain Center, Mr. Chairman, is engaged in a number of projects, both existing and some new projects that are coming up. We continue to work on tokenized carbon credits, on sequestration and carbon capture. One that we've engaged in, I believe after my last report, is we are working with a consortium of 200 research libraries across the country to develop NFTs of some of their properties, which would then allow them to market those NFTs for additional revenue, but also to make those properties available to the public. In many cases, research libraries just have things hidden in their basements that no one's really aware of. And the Dean of Libraries here is very much involved in that program, as will our American Heritage Museum. So that's going to be a pretty exciting project moving forward. We're working on a few new projects that are just getting teed up involving the tokenization of renewable energy credits. Interestingly, we're talking with the council that validates Irish beef. So that may be an interesting project. And we are also working on a project that will provide blockchain validation for an organization that does two interesting things. One is it engages local fishermen in Africa and Indonesia to help clean plastics out of the ocean. But as part of that component, there's also an anti-human trafficking component, which is actually very interesting. And as we get more information on that, I'll certainly let the committee know. Probably the biggest news to hit the Blockchain Center is we now have a fairly robust staff with the Blockchain Center. We have hired an assistant director, Candace Ryder, who I think I saw walk in. If Candace would like to stand up for a second and just say hello.
Welcome, Ms. Ryder. I'm glad you're here.
We've also hired a project manager named Brian Barr, who is unfortunately out today. We have a student intern, Haley Neeson, who will be with us till the end of the year, a teaching assistant, Anastasia Paravetin, who is from Ukraine. So it's certainly very interesting to get her perspective on what's going on. And we've also hired a visiting professor from the University of Arkansas named Daniel Conway, who will be teaching a applied blockchain course I'm going to talk about in a little bit. Just wrapping up on the Blockchain Center, I want to publicly thank some corporate sponsors that continue to support the university in these endeavors. IOG has continued to be a very strong leader in helping us with the Blockchain Center and a number of our initiatives, which include scholarships, teaching assistants, as well as paying some overrides for faculty. Crypto.com has joined us this year, as well as Ava Labs. So they're now joining both Ripple and Kraken and supporting some of our projects. So I just wanted to publicly thank them, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to now just kind of wrap up and talk about what's happening with AI on campus. The University of Wyoming is working to make sure that academic programs, curriculum, and infrastructure are in place for students across the campus and across the university to learn about and get practical experience in AI. And it's, we believe, going to be very important in people's career choices in the future. This includes large language models and ChatGPT, computer vision, neural networks, decision-making sensors and devices, as well as the ethical, legal, and practical implications of using AI. Training of our students in AI is essential as we further innovate in blockchain here in the state. Blockchain can be used to store and distribute AI models with an audit trail and can enhance data security in AI. AI can bring new opportunities for adding intelligence to blockchain-based businesses, and blockchain can help AI scale to create new trustworthy data economy. Paired together, AI and blockchain will provide new opportunities for automation, for example, by embedding AI models in smart contracts. This pairing will impact healthcare, pharmaceutical industry, financial services, supply chain, and numerous applications across to the energy sector. UW is pursuing an AI initiative that would have broad impact across the university and is working on new undergraduate and graduate opportunities through its new School of Computing, Department of Electrical Engineering, Computer Science, College of Business, and initiatives including a new Master's in Engineering in Petroleum Engineering with a focus on data science and blockchain, and a new applied AI course in the College of Business, as I mentioned, would be taught by Dr. Daniel Conway from the University of Arkansas. Last week, a $2 million proposal to the National Science Foundation from UW would, if funded, provide stipends for undergraduate students in a planned new interdisciplinary Masters of Science in Artificial Intelligence, focused on explainable and trustable AI. In addition, proposals are being developed and funding sources to fund AI computing infrastructure at the NCAR Wyoming Supercomputing Center to support research, education, and engagement with Wyoming industry in AI. With that, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chairman, I am open to answer any questions anyone may have.
Thank you, Mr. Lupien. Committee, any questions for the center? Mr. Co-Chair?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Lupien, is there anything that we should have on our horizon, anything that's coming to the legislature in the next session, requests or anything along those lines that we should be contemplating, or for that matter, any programs that legislative support would be helpful for, whether that's financial or through policy?
Mr. Lupien?
Thank you, through the chair, Mr. Co-Chairman. I think there may be some potential legislative changes needed around the stable token. I know we'll have an update on that coming up. And I have seen the two bills around AI that I think are certainly worth moving forward with. I can certainly speak with President Seidel and Executive Director Gabrielle Allen of the School of Computing to see on AI if there's anything that may be needed, and report that to the chair, to the committee at a future time.
Mr. Co-Chair?
Yeah, thank you. And that's exactly what I would ask, is if there are any requests that are coming in this area that we be CC'd, we understand that they're coming, and we potentially be briefed on those so that we know ahead of time what the university is looking for. Thank you.
Sure, I appreciate that, and I will do, Mr. Co-Chair.
Committee, any other questions for Mr. Lupien? One that I have kind of broadly, obviously, I think some of what you're doing with some of these programs are excellent. I know broadly there's still kind of that gap between the theory of blockchain, its applicability to certain industries, and actually practicality. I think there was an article that was that Bloomberg wrote about blockchain technology used for authentication purposes in the high fashion industry, right? Lots of people like to fake that stuff and try to sell it as legitimate, and how that there's still some gaps there and what's going on. And maybe is there anything you can touch on in terms of what you're teaching in this program that could kind of help bridge that gap?
Yeah, happy to. I have a number of students that are working on research projects around that type of technology. The challenge tends to be today cost and complexity on operating those systems. And with near field communication chips and things like QR codes, we are making it much easier and more accessible. The challenge tends to be right now is, it still can be somewhat costly to hash certain items to blockchains, and that kind of sets a price threshold of where a product could be in order to use this technology. But those costs are changing every day, and it's becoming much more and more common. So I do think we're closing that gap pretty radically. And we actually do have a student here that is with a student startup company called Indigo Blockchain Solutions, who is doing software as a service for blockchain, and would be working on projects such as that.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Lupien. Mr. Lindholm is the MC of this fine event. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We appreciate you both being here. So I think up next, we're going to do an update on the stable token. I think we're going to have Mr. Ravel. We got our commissioners here on the committee. And Commissioner Pope, do you want to do it from here, or do you want to do it from where you're sitting? It's either works just fine.
Your pleasure, Mr. Chairman.
They're good with the arrows.
Is that all right?
Mr. Ravel, go for it.
All
Take us
right.
away.
Thank you.
Or Mr. Pope, did you want to
Mr.
go
Pope,
first?
jump into if you would, please. So just real quickly, per the legislation that was passed, the governor, auditor, and treasurer nominated 4 subject matter experts to join them on the commission. Flavia Naves, who's a former general counsel of Circle, Jeff Wallace, who's a local banker, Wyoming Bank and Trust, Mr. Pope, and myself are the 4 subject matter experts. The commission then created 3 subcommittees. The hiring of an executive director, that's chaired by Commissioner Racinas. I'll come back to that in a moment. the Legal, Regulatory and Compliance Subcommittee that's chaired by Governor Gordon, and then the Token Structure and Parameters Subcommittee, which is chaired by Commissioner Meyer. We've had 4 meetings of the commission, May, June, July, and then last Thursday, August meeting. In between, there have been numerous subcommittee meetings. At the May meeting, the committee asked for public input, and I'm happy to report that it's been significant and substantial. We have several individuals who've been helping with the subcommittees, and most notably, the University of Wyoming students led by Mr. Lupien presented potential stable token use cases and structures to the commission. The hiring of executive director subcommittee on Thursday, after interviewing a number of candidates, selected potential executive director, Mr. Apollo, who's here in the audience, and have authorized Commissioner Racinas to engage in the hiring process of Mr. Apollo. If anyone's interested, I have Mr. Apollo's background, resume, and of course you can speak with him if you'd like directly. The commission also approved the hiring of outside counsel to advise on regulatory matters. So this would include federal banking and securities regs, KYC, AML, among others. We've authorized Ms. Anderson from the governor's office to engage in that process. So she's going to begin interviewing outside law firms for that.
Mr. Ravel, real
Yes.
quick,
Of course.
you said the outside counsel part. Do we narrow down a list of folks that we are engaging with for outside counsel?
Ms. Anderson is compiling that list and was asking if anyone had any additional ideas to please bring those forward. I don't believe that list is closed as of yet. So to the extent you or anyone else has any ideas, those would be welcome, and please pass those along to Ms. Anderson.
Please continue.
Thank you. And that brings me to the last item, which is that there has been a document that has been sort of tracking our progress, which is the Wyoming Stable Token Business Plan that has been accepted by the commission into the public record and is available on the website if anyone would like to view that. And I do have a copy here again, if any of you all would be interested in it. And Mr. Pope, is there anything that you'd like to add, if I may, Mr. Chairman?
Pope? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only thing that I'd like to add is that the business plan was developed by Commissioner Navas and Commissioner Ravel along with Chris Land. And it is very much a draft at this point, but they have done astounding work on it. So I think that is one of the most important items we have to address, is where the stable token is going, how we're going to get there, and how it's going to eventually generate the income that's anticipated. Thank you very much, Mr. Pope. Members, any questions for our fellow committee members and commissioners? Ms. Co-Chair?
Just on that last point, I did want to add on, following on Mr. Pope, Commissioner Pope's thoughts there, that business plan is a living document as well, and the commission is constantly seeking public input and feedback in the same way that we are on this select committee. Those meetings are also live streamed. I'm pretty sure you can get the recordings of them as well, and the materials. They have been meeting once a month-ish. And I think they've pretty much hit that all along. So I want to say it was probably 5 or 6 meetings that have gone on for the commission. I'd ask Commissioner Reville if that's accurate. How many meetings did we actually have?
Mr. Revelle?
I believe May was the first meeting, if I'm not mistaken, through August, May, June, July, August, in addition to several subcommittee meetings.
Committee members, any further questions? Real quick, is it Apollo or Opala? Apollo, excellent. Would it be okay if you maybe just came forward and just briefly just kind of told us about yourself and your experience with this subject matter?
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Ravel. My name is Anthony Apollo. I am a resident of Cheyenne, Wyoming. And until some paperwork gets signed, I am the founder and CEO of a company called Rensa Incorporated, where we do multimedia distribution, development, and crowdfunding on blockchain. Before my role at Rensa, my background was in audit, accounting, consulting within the Big Four, including roles at KPMG and Ernst & Young. And then in 2017, I began working in the blockchain and digital asset space full-time, starting with a role at a company called Consensus, which is an Ethereum incubator in Bushwick, Brooklyn, working on a project called Solarius, which was a decentralized and token managed science fiction franchise. So certainly on one end of the spectrum, followed by shifting over to another side of things where I worked to put together a compliant debt security with an NBA athlete named Spencer Dinwiddie. That actually got released in July of 2020 on the Ethereum blockchain. Interest payments were made in stable tokens. Maturity hit in this last July. So we hit the term of the bond. The full principal was paid back. The bulk payment was paid back in stable tokens as well. And that has that required the management of about 14 different stakeholders, including teams we brought on internally, counsel, broker-dealer, insurance, many more. And we also had many external stakeholders, including some of the domestic regulators, financial regulators in the US, and groups like the NBA and the Players Association, who were arguably a bigger thorn in my side than some of the regulators. So that is my kind of high-level background. I've been in Cheyenne for about 2 years working on Rensa. We, being myself and my brothers, moved here to run our company in this state because we saw all of the progressive legislation that this group is working on specifically, and we want to be part of it, and here we are.
Committee members, any questions for Mr. Apollo? Mr. Co-Chair.
I believe your original background was as a CPA. Is that accurate? I think that's worth highlighting.
Mr. Apollo, go for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Office. I do not have a CPA. I did not pursue my CPA. I do have an MBA, finance from Fordham University's Gabelli School of Business, and I did work within KPMG for several years
Okay.
in audit, but did not pursue this.
It was in audit. Okay,
Yes.
gotcha. Understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Apollo. You said that, it sounds like that debt instrument has performed properly as expected.
Correct.
Thank you. True question. Was it a security?
Yes, absolutely. So we did Reg D filings, we did our blue sky filings with the appropriate states. We worked with companies that had the appropriate money transmitter licenses. It was a significant effort, one that when we spec'd it out, we thought would take about 6 months, took about 18. That was extended by things like the COVID pandemic, because when you're trying to sell a debt security that is tied to a basketball player's income streams, when the NBA is not playing, that becomes a little bit more difficult. However, we still got it launched in due time. And again, it has kind of lasted its entire duration, hit term, and everything went according to plan.
So, committee, if you would just indulge me for a moment. So to make sure I say this correctly, that the debt instrument was collateralized by the salaries of these players. Is that understanding correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. So it was collateralized by the salary, endorsement deals, and any other revenue streams backed by a personal guarantee from the individual athlete.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Any questions, committee? Mr. Paul, we're really excited you're here. Happy to have you on board.
Thank you for having me. And I will quickly add, happy to answer any questions as well along the way. Thank you.
So I think up next, we're going to do some mining updates. Mr. True, is it okay if we start with you first and then we'll move on to Lee? Is that okay? Wonderful. Mr. True, thank you so much for being here. Obviously, I know who you are, but just for the record and for the committee, just state your name and who you're with.
No trouble. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee members. My name is Kyle True. I'm not a lifelong Casper resident yet. I did come to the University of Wyoming and have a variety of businesses, mostly oil in our background, but have branched out into Bitcoin mining in the last several years and under a company called Diamond Coin. And that's what I'm here to discuss for the committee.
Please continue.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I I need to start by thanking some members of this committee and members of the legislature, some people who may be here in the audience, for putting together a regulatory structure that allowed an entrepreneur like myself to look into Bitcoin, learn what I could about it, and then launch out into a Bitcoin mining operation. I think that Wyoming has Bitcoin mining going on here because of two basic reasons. One is the regulatory clarity that our legislature gave us, for which I'm very grateful. We know that Bitcoin is a commodity. There are so many things that the feds have stayed vague about that would have kept me from investing. But I could say, no, I'm following state law. And if the feds ever come down on me, I think that will be great clarity. And so look, there are times to complain about government and complain about regulation. That's not when you're running your business. That's when the legislature's meeting. When you're running your business, you need to understand what the laws are and understand how to comply and how to be creative and accretive to society, your bottom line, as you move forward. And the legislature gave us that, and that's the only reason I was willing to move into this and to try. Having said that, the second thing that's necessary is available power and low cost power. So I think the regulatory clarity that we have in Wyoming is stellar. I talk to people around the globe. They wish that they could work in Wyoming and have what we have in Wyoming. Thrilled to say I'm a Wyoming LLC, and so far all of our Bitcoin mining has been done in the state of Wyoming. So I have regulatory confidence that most, maybe all of my peers don't have. Texas included. Texas has not caught up to what you guys have accomplished, for which I'm thankful. The second thing that I think we need for Bitcoin mining in particular is available power and low cost power. And that's where we're running into some concerns. Years ago, we had that. And I'll describe two issues or two types of Bitcoin mining that I'm familiar with. Let me back up a little bit and say, I'm an active participant in the space. I run into other active participants in the space. I talk to attorneys who work there, investors who work there. I do not have a perfect overview of everything. I see it from my perspective, and I try to glean what I can from others. We don't have a regulatory or a political lobbying group. So I can't say that I represent the space, but I am here to tell you what I'm seeing from where I sit. In Wyoming, I think there are two kinds of Bitcoin mining businesses. There are on-grid businesses and off-grid businesses. Let's start by talking about on-grid. On-grid is where you're using power from Rocky Mountain Power, High Plains Power, one of the power companies, and you go and you make a contract with them. And because they're a regulated utility, they're fairly unique. They can't spend a bunch of extra money unless they go to the PSC and get permission to spend money. But when they go to the PSC and they get permission to spend money, they get a guaranteed rate of return. So everybody gets to pay more every time that inflation, regulatory overburden, et cetera, comes in, or a higher cost of power generation comes into play for the utility company, then they get to charge us more. The on-grid, I'm sorry to say, is not looking good for the future of Bitcoin mining in the state of Wyoming. I have friends that are doing it. Diamond Coin is not currently,
To say the least.
Yes, it's a challenge. And if there's anything we could do, it should be addressed. Wyoming is the energy state. I've never worked in coal. I've never worked in uranium, but boy, you look at oil, gas, uranium, coal, we could power the planet. We have so much here. It's clean. Fortunately, we don't have sulfur in our coal. We're very fortunate. We're very blessed. And yet we're taking down low cost coal-fired power generation to put in silly power generation. I'm all for wind. If you're a rancher and you have a perfect battery called a water tank, then you can bring up your product and you don't care when the wind blows, as long as it blows sometime in the week. And then my battery, called a water tank, takes my product and I put it there and the cattle can come and drink whenever. Wind has its place. Wind does not have its place on the grid. All wind does on the grid is increase costs and lower reliability, but we're going there. So what we're seeing is as the power mix becomes more wind and solar, and as it becomes less coal, And I have to say, I'm all for natural gas, but all power sources have their place. And natural gas is wonderful for heating your home. At the burner tip, natural gas is a blessing. But natural gas is not as good as coal for power generation, for baseline power generation, for a variety of reasons, including cost and the variability of natural gas as it swings. It's much more volatile. Okay, forgive me. All this to say that as the power mix is changing and as Rocky Mountain Power and the other regulated utilities in Wyoming keep pushing for less appropriate power sources, in my mind, they are increasing the cost of power to every Wyoming resident and every business in Wyoming. And so a power intensive business is less competitive here. CoinDesk estimates that today globally, the average price that a Bitcoin miner pays for their power is about 5 cents, just above 5 cents. In Wyoming, the best price you can get, if you exclude a tiny little sliver over in Jackson Hole where they have some amazing water, if you exclude that, the best power price you can get in Wyoming is roughly 6 cents. So we already start at a disadvantage. But because of our regulatory structure, people were still looking and coming here. If we get this 29% power price increase, you can almost say goodbye to Bitcoin mining on grid. The people who are here are clinging. They made their investment decisions prior to this increase in prices. And so while there is some Bitcoin mining on grid in the Cheyenne area, there's some in Casper, there's some spread out in the Gillette area that I'm aware of. I don't think there's any in the Wind River Basin, for example. High Plains, I don't think has much going on there on grid. I'm concerned about the future of that. And I think the reason is not the good things that we've done with the regulatory environment. It's because of the power prices. So then if you shift to off-grid Bitcoin mining, off-grid Bitcoin mining is near and dear to my heart. That's what we do. And I like it for a couple of reasons. It's oil related, and my background is the oil business. Got my petroleum engineering degree here at the university while they still had that before they eliminated it, brought it back. That's its own drama. And so what we do is we take gas that would have been flared, that does not have pipeline access. And we take that gas, run it through a generator that provides our power to run Bitcoin mining. That was a great business when Bitcoin was $60,000. The hash rate was significantly lower than it is. Miners cost whatever they cost. And the generator business was struggling and they wanted to rent their generators. So they would rent them for a very reasonable price. That was a good business. But as we know in commodity businesses, and I do think of Bitcoin as a commodity, I'm a price taker, not a price maker. Those are very volatile. In order to stay in that, well, 2 years ago, there were 5 Casper-based companies involved in off-grid Bitcoin mining. I know of one that's still remaining, and that's us. And the reason that we're still there is most of those had an on-grid component as well, and they just shifted to on-grid when the generator rentals went through the roof. Instead, I went out and bought generators, and I'm working now to maintain these generators at a low rate. Now I have to have expertise, not in Bitcoin, but in generators. Okay, I took that on myself. We're doing that. So this industry has not grown, is unlikely to grow, I would say. There are big players like Crusoe that are really not active in the state of Wyoming. They're in North Dakota, partly because we have natural gas takeaway. We have pipelines, which we should. I'm glad we do. So my company is sort of a niche company that takes small occurrences where you have relatively reliable natural gas, but not enough to justify laying a pipeline. And in Wyoming, we have enough pipeline infrastructure. If you have a very good reserve, it's worth it to lay a pipeline, especially the western part of the state, with the brilliant management that the left coast states have made of their power systems. We occasionally get to sell natural gas to them for $50 an MCF because they've made horrible decisions. So that makes that natural gas. No one wants to spend that on Bitcoin mining. They want to wait and maintain the availability of those wonderful Northwestern and Western markets. And so while that's only in the winter, you really won't find much Bitcoin mining growth in the western part of the state because we have so much natural gas, great pipeline infrastructure, and a phenomenal occasional market to the west. So you're talking about the eastern part of the state, and it probably doesn't have a tremendous amount of growth because it's a real struggle to compete with 5-cent power when you have to take the natural gas, run it through a generator, pay for and maintain that generator, and then pay for and maintain the ASICs and the other things. So I very much appreciate that the regulatory infrastructure is brilliant. It's the best in the world. That's why we chose to try this space. We're the last man standing that I know of doing off-grid Bitcoin mining. And as power prices increase, I think the on-grid is going to really struggle.
Thank you very much, Mr. True. Any questions or comments? Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of comments, and thanks for participating today. Really appreciate you coming down to Laramie and letting us know how things are going. The first question I would have is on the off-grid side. Is there anything that is still in the way, any challenges that you're facing that we might want to contemplate from a statutory or regulatory standpoint? So I think we have it mostly dialed in pretty well, but is there anything we're missing?
Mr. True.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Co-Chairman, thank you for that question. That's a great question. I think the state was, again, proactive in that a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
We have had companies, when we've approached operators to say, we can take your flare gas and we can do something positive with it, many have been terrified. And we've had to take them to, if we pay for gas, you're only selling it for that price. That's considered the price, market price there. The state's not going to aggressively come after you for, a Northwest pipeline price when you're in the Powder River Basin and there's no pipeline to your, and we've had mixed success with convincing them. Some people are just scared. But no, I think those are the kinds of things. The regulatory clarity is all you can ask for from government, I think, reasonably. And I think we have that in spades.
Mhm.
So I don't think any subsidy would help because those long-term are not,
No,
they're not sustainable.
But why are they, Mr.
Co-Chair.
Why are they afraid? I mean, they have an obligation to flare typically, and they've got some air quality requirements associated with that. You're effectively acting as a better flare, so to speak, and probably give them some type of return in addition to a higher performance flare that they don't have to pay for. What's their concern? What does hold back the people that say, well, we're not so certain?
Mr. True.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, we've had a variety of concerns out of legal departments and land departments. We've had concerns, does our right-of-way agreement with the landowner or the state allow for a Bitcoin mining company to come out? We've argued that, just as you did, that we are mitigating your flare. I believe we have two businesses. One is generating Bitcoin and one is flare mitigation. And so we argue that anything to do with the management of their oil well and the products subsequent to that, which include natural gas, are permissible under their current right-of-way agreement. But we've had land departments and legal departments concerned, and we've had one customer in particular go back to their landowners and explicitly say, we're going to have Bitcoin miners there. Would you like us to pay you more? And so we've had that, and that was important to them, so they're doing it. The second one has been valuation. They've been concerned that if we come in and don't pay for the gas, or if we come in and pay a trespass fee to be on their site, is that inherently a natural gas purchase agreement for the natural gas that we use? And will they be audited later and told that when Diamond Coin paid them a trespass fee, it was a backdoor natural gas purchase, and they owe severance and ad valorem on those on natural gas sales? So the customer who's been concerned about that told us, we don't want a trespass fee, pay us for the natural gas. Great, we'll write a contract where we pay for natural gas. And then they're paying paltry sums, but they're paying severance and ad valorem on that. So that's been the types of concerns.
Oh, so they're actually paying severance and ad valorem since they're selling it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh, interesting. Okay. So they're basically not flaring it at that point. They're selling it to you for beneficial use.
Correct.
That's an interesting approach. All right, on the unregulated side, Mr. Chairman, or excuse me, the regulated utility side. In your discussions, have there been any thoughts on approaches that the state could take to help alleviate the concerns? We know that there's the rate case coming forward that is certainly on everybody's mind, but in terms of policies, anything that might be helpful for the state to take action on?
Mr. Drew.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chair, thank you. I would hope that somewhere in the charter of the regulated utility, that it states that their goal, their charter is to provide low cost, reliable. And I would look back into that and find that. I think that these companies, largely Warren Buffett owned and led companies, are not trying to be a low cost producer to provide reliable, low cost energy to their constituents, to their customers. Now, Warren Buffett has problems most of us don't have. It's really hard to get a good rate of return on $4 billion or $8 billion or $16 billion. These are challenges most of us don't struggle with every day. And so when he finds a regulatorily approved expense that he can make, he'll go for it because then he gets a guaranteed return on the other side. And so shutting down a plant early and saying, well, it's probably going to be bad someday, and we could find an engineer that says there's a concern. He's rushing those to their end of life sooner than need be. And these concerns about coal, in my opinion, and again, I'm not in the coal industry, clean coal is a godsend. And we can very responsibly to the environment produce coal for hundreds of years going forward at a much lower cost than natural gas, much lower cost than wind, much lower cost than solar. And I would argue for all three of those and could make the case that coal is much better for the environment because CO2 is actually not hurting the environment, but SOx and NOx do hurt the environment. And when you get the carbon footprint of wind, the trash that we can't deal with these windmills, the solar components that anytime you have a hailstorm, now you have to throw away all these solar components, and good luck going and mining more somewhere in Africa and bringing all that here to do solar. Solar has its place. It's not for base load. And so I would hope that we could bring that ship righted to its original mission and stop allowing them to say, well, there might be a regulatory environmental concern someday. Let's go ahead and scuttle this very effective coal plant in favor of something newer and more exciting. Now, what's going on with nuclear, I find very exciting, and I hope we continue to pursue that. I would hope it'd be additive to our energy mix in this state and not replacing coal. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drew. Committee, any other questions or comments? Mr. Chair, I will certainly say, I fully agree that there's been a lot of frustration with our utilities here in Wyoming, and this, myself, Mr. Co-Chair in this committee, we fought tooth and nail with utilities, and despite that exact rhetoric, we're pro-business, we want to be here to help, we want to do all these things. What the action showed was anything but. We obviously worked hard on creating these deregulated power zones that said, okay, if you're not going to sell them the power, let's just create these little areas where they can come in and sell to each other only in that area. And of course, they fought us tooth and nail there as well. But it's been a big frustration. We certainly will not give up, and we really appreciate your investment. Mr. Yin, Mr. Minority Leader, did you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. True, one comment I'm really excited to hear that there still is a business that is using flare gas. In 2021, Representative Hunt passed HB 189, which should allow you to get an exemption from severance taxes for that flare gas. You need to apply for a certification from the Oil and Gas Commission, but that should allow all of those taxes to be exempted. We specifically passed that bill. I think it was to actually match one of the Dakotas with their taxing authority on how we allow flare gas to be used. As long as it would never have been normally piped out, it should be eligible for an exemption there. The question that I have for you, Mr. True, is would Wyoming, if Wyoming had more options for demand response contracts or time of use style contracts, would that help blockchain businesses that are on grid? Because one thing that's unique about blockchain is that the mining can be turned on and off with a flip of the switch. So if there were possibilities for you to get cheaper power on the grid by having demand response contracts, would that help blockchain providers in the state of Wyoming?
Mr. True.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In short, Representative, yes. Any flexibility and creativity that will bring down costs will be attractive to a certain portion of the Bitcoin mining community. Not all. Some people think that 100% uptime is the holy grail, but some people think that low power costs over 96% of uptime is the holy grail. And so, yes, absolutely. If Wyoming had more flexibility, that would attract more attention by certain members of the Bitcoin mining community. And I would ask, the flare severance exemption, was that beyond state lands? Was that only applicable to state leases?
Representative Yin.
So, Mr. Chairman, everyone can look this up. It is House Bill 189 from 2021. It's for natural gas that's been consumed on the site and would have otherwise been vented or flared under the authority of Wyoming Oil and Gas Commission, has no value and is exempt from taxation as long as the natural gas is certified by the Wyoming Oil and Gas Commission as to have originated from a qualifying well. So I think that qualifies for all wells and not just those on state lands.
Mr. Co-Chair.
And yeah, following up on Representative Yen, the reason for that legislation is exactly the conversation that we were having a minute ago. And I was going to follow up with you on that because assuming that it's reasonable that you didn't have access to a pipeline, the state is basically paying you for the flaring to occur, assuming that it's a flaring event and not waste. And then you are putting it to beneficial use. But the trade-off there, the win-win, is that realistically, your flaring is much more beneficial than the flaring that it would be going for from the state's perspective. So that is the justification for Representative Hunt's bill, and a number of us worked on that legislation for the purpose of the operations that you're looking at. So I don't know whose signature you need to get, sort of, maybe it's OGCC, you need to go to them and have that conversation, but you should be able to hold up a nice piece of paper to these folks you're talking to and say, no, it's okay.
Mr. Co-Chair, certainly, Mr. True, should you pursue that option? I think you speak for the committee that you have our support and we're willing and able to assist if you need. Any further questions? Well, thank you very much for your time.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time. Thanks for the education. I thought that was only state lands. I appreciate it.
I did, fortunately, make a slight mistake. There were some folks online who wanted to testify in terms of the stable token. We're going to go ahead and finish up. And if you're online, we're going to go ahead and finish up testimony on the mining component, and then we'll circle back to the online comments for stable token if that's amenable to the committee. Mr. Filer, if you want to go ahead. Mr. Filer, obviously, I know who you are, but for the record, please state your name and who you're with.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Lee Filer. I'm one of the co-founders and site director of crypto mining facility in Laramie County called Kryptonite Hosting. Next to me is my nephew, Joey Darwell, who is also a co-founder of Kryptonite and the president of our company. With that, Mr. Chairman, we can proceed and start. Or
Mr. Filer, please go ahead.
okay, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to let Joey speak on a lot of the different points we're going to bring up today, but I just want to kind of give you guys an update from last year and the year before. We've been testifying this committee now, I think now 3 or 4 years in a row. When we first started, of course, we haven't broke ground on anything yet. We're looking for land, we're looking for power, we're looking for all these different things in order to make a Bitcoin mining facility work, especially in Laramie County. is where we focused a lot of our attention on because that's where I live. But since then we have now, we did open up a 10 megawatt site out in Pine Bluffs. And then last year I testified that we were getting ready to break ground on another 30 megawatts in Laramie County. And I'm pleased to let you all know that we now have 40 megawatts running as of April 1st in Laramie County. We did this mostly without any, actually exactly without any outside money. It was all self-funded. We did not raise any money. We did not actively seek any help as far as for our build outs and things like that. It was something that we wanted to build from the ground up ourselves. So a lot of us got together, our life savings went into it, and we built our company strictly on Wyoming values and the laws that were passed here with blockchain. We've worked with many power companies. We've worked with, the committee here. We've worked with other outside groups that, try to, learn the best routes and ways to get a facility like this up and running. And it was a chore. Just that the meetings, I can't even tell you how many meetings. It's a blur. But at the end of the day, we are profitable. We do employ 13 people in Laramie County, all at above the industry standard rates as far as labor costs. We do provide health insurance, vacation, all those different things to our employees. It's 24-hour operation, 365 days a year. So there's always somebody on our sites at all times. What we did with our community, and Joey can piggyback on this, is we hired everybody to build out our sites was a Wyoming resident. We used Wyoming contractors, we used Wyoming workers, even down to helping a master electrician who didn't have all the funds to start his own electrical company. We actually helped him start his own electrical company. And now he's providing all of our service contracts for our sites. So now we have somebody that actually is actively working on our sites, doing upkeep, maintenance, transformer repairs. I mean, everything you can think of to keep our site up and running as much as possible. And with that, I'll kind of let Joey hit on some other points and things like that.
Please go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having us. So some of the points we brought up, I believe about 2 years ago, was about the sales tax revenue that we'd bring to state and the county. I stated that we'd produce over $1 million a year in sales tax revenue for the state through our power bill, and we're on pace to actually be over that. 2/3 of that goes to the state and 1/3 of it goes to Laramie County. We have the full 40 megawatts online and energized. It's just had April 1st. Some of the other points we also want to bring up is we're actually opening up a S19 for certified repair center through Bitmain, which is for the machines that we actually operate. And that'll actually be technically skilled jobs that we bring into the county. Because a big issue is that there is no local repair for these machines. So we actually originally were sending them all the way to New Hampshire. And now we're able to actually do these repairs on site at the Archer complex. So, we're looking to bring other mining companies that are local to the area and also, neighboring states to send their machines for repair here versus, farther distances away. And that's like soldering skills and technical skills as well for that. Some of the other things we wanted to bring up was about the other industries that we do support, such as local supply houses from Crum Electric to Home Depot. We also bring, for the power generation, our power bills over $1 million a month. So that's a lot of revenue to, local, high West Energy and stuff like that. So we also have about 13,000 S19s running in Laramie County, which is about 1/3 of 1% of the total hash rate for the Bitcoin network. The state's goal is, from my understanding, about 5%. So we're doing our best to try and get there. So any questions first?
Thank you very much. Committee, any questions? Kaufman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I was just wondering if you could maybe comment. We heard some comments from Mr. True regarding kind of the competitive landscape with respect to off-grid mining, but I'm curious what you're seeing regarding the competitiveness of on-grid mining, particularly in Laramie County. There's been quite a bit of activity.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman,
Joey, go ahead.
Mr. Kaufman. So what we have is a demand response contract with High West Energy. I can't get into the exact pricing of it, but I can talk about what we are able to do in order to have this contract. So we're able to curtail our load within 5 minutes for High West Energy. So we haven't had any emergency shutoffs, but we have had scheduled curtailments during the summer, which is when the energy prices go up, where we actually are able to shut off for a set period of time. So for example, Frontier Days, we were offline for about 10 hours a day. But outside of that, we are over that 95% uptime that was mentioned before. Transmission seems to be the biggest problem with getting power in Wyoming for us versus the actual price. So that's what we'd like to kind of have worked on with the local utility companies, is actually getting access to power.
Mr. Chairman, I can kind of elaborate on that too.
Mr. Feiler, please.
Mr. Kaufman, and that's one thing that Joey and I we've been, even while we're doing our build outs and stuff like that, we've been all over the state. We've talked to so many different power companies, different players in the game, and all these different things. The one thing we are is we're relentless, man. We're going to go knock on their doors until they give us what we want, what Wyoming wants. We're not going to stop. I'm hoping that this time next year, when we come back to you all, I'm hoping to give you an update that we're breaking ground on another site. We're going to do our best to keep actively moving this forward, especially with our minor repair facility. I mean, just the cost savings of all the machines that are just in Laramie County alone, or in the surrounding states, or in Wyoming. It's going to save so many companies a load of money. Being able to just ship them right to Cheyenne. We have an on-site certified repair team that could do everything. We invested quite a bit of money into this to get these guys trained. And shipping, send them all the way out to Georgia and having all the technicians come in. It was an extensive 3.5 to 4 week training process before they even do on the job training. So, but that was something I thought we could really bring as far as to Wyoming, was something else besides just the mining aspect. We want to bring in, every aspects of this industry to our area. And that's why we chose a lot of the, everything from ordering wire to even little parts and pieces for our electrical came locally, because it shouldn't just be about drawing power, mining Bitcoin. It should be what supports the industry, that helps the industry grow in Wyoming. And we made that our policy at our company, that we're going to do our very best to be able to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Feiler. Committee, any further questions? Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you. And did you say that you're at 40 megawatts? And that's as of April of this year, is that accurate?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
What does your future timeline look like? And I know that that's probably more dependent upon how much more power you can get than anything else, but are there any more build outs that you expect to be able to put online based on power agreements?
Mr. Feiler, or
Mr. Chairman, I think all that bases on is the power companies themselves, where we can get the power readily available. So that's just us working with the power companies. I mean, everything from my nephew and I driving all over the state, looking at substations and calling the power companies and saying, do you have any available power here? What kind of deal can we make? Who owns the land? Do we need to do a lease? Do we need to purchase land? Because we've done both. We purchase land and we lease. It just depends on that substation or what readily available power there is. And like my nephew was saying, transmission is hard. It's I guess it's public. It's in the newspaper here in Laramie a couple of years back that we were going to build a big facility up at the Sierra Sky Park. One of the problems with us being able to build at that substation, which is a massive substation, was the transmission. The transmission study that we paid for, the power company came back and said, well, we need, $40-50 million just to bring in one transmission line to that substation, which killed the whole deal. That job was going to be partnered with Albany County, the Wyoming Business Council. I mean, all these different partners were going to be involved in this, and everybody's going to benefit, down to where we even had it figured out for distribution wise, for different things that we want to distribute, have distribution center and all those things. I mean, we were looking at 100 jobs that just got lost because of a transmission study.
And Mr. Chairman, is that because of our regulated structure where only one utility is able to be involved in that? Or is that in other words, if we didn't have that requirement, I believe there are 4 utilities, if I'm not mistaken, that link into that particular substation. Would we have been in a different circumstance if we had had a different regulation structure for power purchase at the megawatt scale?
Mr. Feiler?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, I believe so. I think it would have made a little bit of a difference if we could have gone to a different company, you know, and said, hey, you know, you're bringing in power into there too, but nobody jumped up, you know, and said, hey, you know, we're willing to take this on except for the community economic drivers of Albany County and Laramie. You know, they were all in on it, and everybody was kind of down about it. You know, I believe that Sears Sky Park was built for a Verizon data center originally.
That is accurate. Yeah, there was an expectation that there'd be a massive amount of power available.
Yes.
And hearing and knowing that that wasn't the case is very disappointing, I think, to the county. Mr. Chairman.
Imagine that.
Yeah, right. Along those same lines, and looking at challenges of locating, if you were to call up the utilities and say, hey, you know, we want 10 megawatts, where can you place this? Where do you have existing infrastructure? Where do you have existing power available? Is that a cooperative conversation? Is that a conversation you can have? I've heard some concerns that it was kind of the opposite, which is if you pay us, you know, if you pick a site and pay us money, we'll let you know whether there's power there. How has your experience gone?
All right, Joey, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, it's definitely changed over the last 2 years since we started. You know, in the beginning, we didn't have as much experience with building out sites, and but now I think that we have a name around the Cheyenne area. You know, us reaching out to local utility companies, I think the conversation has changed from you know, they probably do get a lot of calls from people out of the state looking for power. You know, the industry was brand new 2 years ago, and there's a big mad dash for power. And now it's kind of become where it's more players that already have existing operations looking for power. So I think now they've become more helpful in trying to get us power. But the problem is that, you know, for example, we had to go through a FERC approval process for our contract. That took about 10 months. Of the FERC approval side of it, that didn't even include the drafting of the actual contract. So I think that's kind of our biggest obstacle, is based on when we talk to utility, they do seem like they want us there, in my opinion.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Let's go, Chair.
Why did you have to get FERC approval? I mean, I understand why the utility would need to get FERC approval if they were changing their loading, but with the regulated structure, theoretically, the trade is that the utilities that are given the franchise for the area will be able to meet your power needs. They might need some time, but it's their obligation to do it. Was that how it played out, or did you have to figure out how to get FERC approval?
You want to go or me?
Feiler, go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman. The reason why we had to go through the FERC process was I do believe there's legislation in Wyoming that exempted, I believe, our transmission company, Tri-State, from being regulatory by the Wyoming Public Service Commission.
Okay.
And that's why, so their regulatory commission is FERC. So that's why we had to go through FERC and not the Wyoming Public Service Commission.
Understood. Thank you. It's helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair, and I certainly agree. It's frustrating. Mr. Feiler, if you wouldn't mind, maybe touch a little bit on some of the controversy that's been, that's gotten some circulation in the news with some of the money that has been happening in Wyoming, concerns of ownership, that type of stuff, and specifically how it applies to you guys. Maybe tell me about your ownership structure, you know, how you guys are generating revenue, all that kind of stuff, to maybe get that on the record.
Mr. Chairman, I'll do the ownership structure part. As far as revenue side, this is why he's the president and an accountant. So I'll let him deal with numbers. Our ownership structure is pretty easy in our company. We have 4 different owners, all from myself and my nephew are here, in course, in Wyoming, and our other partners are from Pennsylvania and New York. All of our money that we generate at our sites is in US dollars. You know, deposits go in as US dollars into our bank accounts. We do not I mean, besides our own little wallets, then we buy Bitcoin or whatever. I mean, you got to believe in the industry if you're going to do it, you know, but I purchased my own Bitcoin and stuff like that. but that's how we're structured is, you know, at the end of the day, it's all of our money is made by US dollars, goes into our local bank right here in Cheyenne, Wyoming. You know, and things like that. But as far as the profitability, the numbers and how our customer base works, I'll let Joey do that part.
Please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, yeah,
Is
so
your last name Filer as well?
Darwell.
Darwell, okay. Please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, so, you know, our anchor client is, they're actually from Georgia. You know, she's a Virginia resident and a citizen, and also from Canada is our main two anchor clients. But all of the infrastructure on our site, we own up to the container, the mobile data centers. So, you know, talk about, you know, these takeovers and stuff like that, I don't really quite understand, because we have the power contract, we have all the infrastructure for our sites. So I don't know what the concern exactly is for that. But yeah, again, all of our stuff is United States owned at our company.
Thank you, Mr. Darwell. A follow up. What separates your outfit from some of the ones that have made some of the headlines recently?
Mr. Chairman, I think what separates us is business model, actually, more than anything. It's not just to structure the company. I think it's more of what you say you do. We started this, you know, a few years ago by coming to everybody and meeting with everybody we could, stating that, you know, we were going to do our own build outs. We weren't going to do where we raise money from anyone else. We're going to be self-funded. We're going to build a company from the ground up and be from Wyoming. I think that's one way we separate ourselves from a lot of other mining operations. I think they all have their own ways of being able to jump into this capitalist market and move forward and things like that. But I think that's what separates us, is the fact that we just did exactly what we were going to say. We didn't say a bunch of stories and then turn around and change it and do something else, or raise money or sell anything off. We've kept everything. So I think that's the main thing that would separate us from our competitors or our local Bitcoin mining community, you know, because the one thing that we've also said is that we would love to have every Bitcoin mining facility in Wyoming that gets a contract that wants to do a build out needs to succeed. Because if one fails, then it's a black eye on the whole community. We want to make sure that as Bitcoin mining facilities, that we're all coming back to the state and we're giving you good updates, that we're moving forward with this industry, not going backwards. So anybody that has reached out to my nephew and I, as far as, you know, needing help coming out to it, we've done so many site visits, how we built out our site, how we did it so fast, who we used. I mean, all these different things, we shared it. We've always been an open book, even with our competitors, because I believe that this is something big for Wyoming. Yeah, it's, you know, just, but I think that's, you know, a lot of I've toured a lot of other facilities, like even in Texas and stuff like that. I mean, you pretty much have to leave your phone in your truck. They don't want you taking a picture. They don't want you knowing any trade secrets. It's not a big secret. You hook up transformers, you plug them in, and you hook up the internet, and there you go. That's the trade secret, you know? So it's, you know, so I don't know what there is to hide. We've never hid anything, and we welcome anybody at any time to come out to our facility. We've never told anybody no, and that they couldn't come out, even if they are a competitor, and we're there to help.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Yeah, thanks. Lee, I wonder if you can put together just a short, like a one pager, you know what we're talking about. You've been in this role of kind of the revenue that's coming in associated with the company as it's standing right now, a little bit about that history, number of jobs created, and then maybe a little bit about the future, and send us that by email if you have an opportunity to do that. I think it's very helpful for us to understand what is being given back to the state, and what the benefits to the state of Wyoming are for your business, for other businesses that actually ask Mr. True the same question, so that we can make sure that our colleagues in the legislature understand your good work and the good work that's going on around the state. Appreciate that. Appreciate the ongoing updates. Great work on this.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we can get that to you right away. I'm probably within a couple of days. Yeah, no problem.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your efforts, and keep mining coins.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, so real quick, Representative Yin, did you have a question? No, no question. Okay, you popped up, so we weren't sure. Again, thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Real quick, so again, I unfortunately forgot to I lost some of the Zoom testimony on the stable token, so. Where are they online? They are, okay, let's go ahead with Miss DeVore. Let's let her in.
Good morning.
Miss DeVore, obviously, we know who you are, but just for the record, please state your name and who you're with.
Kim DeVore, and I am with Jonah Bank of Wyoming. I'm the CEO and president.
We're having a tough time hearing you. Maybe the volume's not up on our end?
Volume.
If that's us, yeah, just stand by for 1 sec. We might have to do some tinkering.
No problem.
Right now.
Can
Right
you
now.
give us a sound check, Kim?
Hear me better?
Or I
Yeah,
think you might have the wrong microphone selected under your.
Okay,
Zoom
how about now?
That's
Can you
better.
hear me better now?
that's better. Yep, we can
Okay.
hear you loud and clear. Thanks, Kim. Go ahead.
Okay, that's super exciting because I would just like to let you know, I don't think I've ever had anyone tell me they can't hear me clearly. I've usually to take it down a notch, so.
Loud and clear.
Thank you very much, Committee Chair Western, and to the rest of the committee for allowing me to virtually attend today and make comments. And actually, if you don't mind, I think it worked out really well that we were able to listen into the Bitcoin mining discussion for a couple purposes. First, thank you very much for the parameters that you've established. I actually have some customers who are in that line of business and we support wholeheartedly. Along the discussion of the power costs, also, I think it would add a little layer that not only do these folks that operate in this realm take on a lot of capital costs for the hardware, all of their time and energy, actually being approved to have an account with the power company and the letters of credit that are involved or the cash deposits that are involved, those are capital intensive in themselves. We have helped a few of our customers end up negotiating through that process with power companies, and I commend the effort it takes to work in that arena. Also, I'm a member of the Wyoming Business Council, and when you were talking about power capacity information and access to power capacity information, I would tell you that that challenge is much more widespread than just related to these particular issues around mining. We have hired a site selection company to do a process throughout the state to help us understand why we do not hit site selection maps. I don't know how to say that, hit the target for site selection companies. And one of the biggest challenges across the state for site selectors for our own municipalities is to understand the capacity that's available from a power aspect. It is very expensive to perform your own study when that information is at the hands of the power companies. So anyway, thank you very much for the delay in testimony because I was educated and had an opportunity to hear a couple other realms.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. DeVore. Is there any questions? Any questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Ms. DeVore. Was there anything else that you wanted to touch base on?
There is, I'd actually registered to testify on the stable token.
Oh, please,
process
yes, go
itself.
ahead. Yes, please, go ahead.
My question for this committee, this commission is behind the legislative intent of issuing the stable coin. As a banker, as this has gone further through the process, which anyone that actually sits on the commission, this will not be new news to you. The bankers throughout the state, specifically community bankers throughout the state, are not incredibly excited about the business plan that was released. It's a little disturbing that there's discussion of obtaining a bank or a trust charter to serve as a regulatory wrapper to launch the stable coin. That gets incredibly close. If in fact, that doesn't even get close. That is in our lane as community banks. We are chartered in this state by the state to operate and take in deposits and turn around and lend them out to small businesses and consumers across the state. And I'm starting to be concerned that the state intends to use its sovereignty status to exercise a competitive advantage over community banks in the state by obtaining a bank or a trust charter. So my question is primarily around, was that the legislative intent to launch a stable token that goes into the retail sector and acts as a payment mechanism for retail customers?
Committee members, that was Co-Chair Elmer having to respond to that.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Warren, and you and I have chatted about this and the legislative intent, and the commission obviously is exploring a series of financial institution partnerships and a methodology for implementing the Wyoming stable token and representation through a commissioner, obviously on the stable token commission that is a representative of state chartered banks. So the intent is certainly to partner with state chartered banks, but looking for a path to issue the Wyoming stable token where, as you know, custody of a cryptocurrency, if your bank were to be the custodian and act in the capacity, you would probably have to say no to doing that. And that's the concern. I think there's a strong desire to find ways to have that partnership. And you know also that there's been a lot of effort to get a speedy bank, a Wyoming state chartered bank that's chartered as a speedy bank, in a position to be able to serve in that capacity as well. So I don't think anything's finalized. I guess I can look over to Joel for further discussion and some of the nuances. I know he's been involved in that discussion as well as one of the commissioners, but the intent of the legislation certainly was not to damage our state chartered banking system. In fact, I feel as though this committee has been a strong advocate for the two-tiered banking system and has done everything we can to fight for state chartered banking rights. That's what we spend honestly too much of our time doing, because there's been so much pushback at the federal level for those state chartered banking rights. That said, I think we'll continue to look for opportunities to work with you and to assuage the concerns that you have. You and I have talked about ideas where we can look at any impacts of the Wyoming stable token on state chartered bank balances in the checking side or saving side, and try to make sure that we're monitoring and keeping our banks whole if it actually does end up affecting the business model. I think there are ways to do that. So look for additional ways to partner there. But no, obviously the intent of the Wyoming Stable Token Act was not to damage our state chartered banks or compete with our state chartered banks, but to achieve the objectives that we've been discussing for the past couple of years in the select committee. And I guess I'd look to Mr. Reville to see if he has any further comments on specifically the discussion about the vehicle that would be used for the issuance of the Wyoming Stable Token.
Mr. Reville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman. There have been no determinations made at the commission level as to what mechanisms may need to be put into place as it relates to federal banking or securities regulation. And that is one of the reasons why we've approved the engagement of outside counsel to help advise with that. But I would concur from the commission's perspective, there is no intent in creating any damage to our community banks in Wyoming. I think that I'm going to speak for myself and not the other 6 members of the commission now, but I think it's important to understand that we are exploring this opportunity. We are endeavoring to see if there's something to do here. And in my opinion, 2 things need to happen in order for this to be potentially viable. One is that the state of Wyoming needs to, in some way, have a unique way to avoid the federal regulatory apparatus that exists today, that is very purposefully designed to quash a stable token or stable token development in the United States. And if there's a way for Wyoming to do that in a novel way, then perhaps this is interesting and worth pursuing. And secondly, can we provide a more transparent and trustable reserves mechanism versus the offshore alternatives that exist today for people who are using stable tokens? And if we can't do both of those things, then I don't know that we've got a viable option here. But that to me is kind of the core of what we're analyzing right now.
Thank you, Mr. Revelle. Mr. Moore, was there anything else you wanted to ask us to cover?
Yes, potentially, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chair. I'm curious as to, I hope that this committee, I guess I should say, and I hope the commission at the same time keeps in mind unintended consequences. Senator Rothfuss, we have spoken at length about ways in which we can partner within community banks. I would like to remind anyone involved that the retail payments sector relies primarily on the operating funds that either a family has or a business has. Those operating funds are kept in their checking accounts. If those are moved outside of Wyoming community banks, there is not a replacement that you can give us back that allows us to continue lending funds at the current interest rates. It will raise borrowing rates for anyone else. If the state were to give us money back through the TDOA, give us deposits back from the state, we have to own securities in order to pledge against those deposits that are over FDIC insurance levels. Owning those securities comes at a cost. Pledging those securities comes at a cost, and it ties up our assets and it allows us to lend less. And if we lend less, rates will be higher, and rates are already higher. So I hope our process was to hope that this business plan will uncover that this process has unintended consequences. So please keep those in mind. And we are happy that there's a banker on that commission now. I do think Mr. Wallace will be able to shed a lot of light into how community banks operate. But please keep in mind, we only have 23, maybe 25 community banks left in this state. We're already at a competitive disadvantage to regionals, and we're facing consolidation on a regular basis. Our best business plan for banks to continue in this state is to serve our customers and make sure we can lend money at a low cost. And that is how the banking system is built. Take in deposits, leverage them, and lend. And that lending function is very important. If you remove any deposits from the banking system, you will upend that balance. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Mr. Ward, I certainly appreciate your concern. And I think if we were at that point, your concern would be warranted. But I think the reality is that we are miles and miles from a situation where we are actively competing with our local banks. I mean, again, I think what the co-chair mentioned that we have spent a lot of time augmenting and supporting our two-tier banking system and ensuring that all the activity we've done, the regulations we've passed have done so to ensure that our community banks, who we all rely on, who I've certainly borrowed plenty of money from over the years, that they remain whole. So again, I think we are a long ways from that point. I think Mr. Revelle, did you want to mention something?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The comments are well taken and appreciated. And I just wanted to emphasize a couple of points, which is that if a Wyoming stable token is deemed to be a good idea and is pursued, that in fact it could be an opportunity that would help the Wyoming community banks in a competitive environment that is shifting whether we move forward or not. It was announced a couple of weeks ago that PayPal has launched a stable token. It was announced or reported in the press last Friday that JP Morgan is launching blockchain-based deposit tokens for payment settlements. So it's happening. The payment rails are shifting to stable tokens. It's already a $125 trillion industry. Unfortunately, most of the activity and innovation has been pushed offshore to date, but that will not be the case forever. And a Wyoming stable token could in fact be an opportunity for our state financial institutions to have a leg up on competitors like JP Morgan and PayPal.
Thank you, Mr. Revelle. Mr. Moore, I think we've got some other folks that we got to move on to, but we do really appreciate your willingness to make some time and share some of your concerns. Please do stay in touch with this committee. I think up next, I believe we've got, Mr. Carruthers. Mr. Carruthers, are you online and can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
We sure can. You have I know who you are, but if you wouldn't mind, just introduce yourself to the committee and who you're with.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Troy Carruthers. I represent American Crypto Fed, and I'd like to thank Ms. DeVore for her comments. I think they were spot on. I am myself from training and from my professional background. I'm a recovering banker and a former retailer. And with that, I've had many years experience on both sides of the fence. And I'd like to reiterate the importance of some of the things that Ms. DeVore mentioned. In particular, I'd like to caution the committee, if possible, on the potential and likely delays associated with an application for a federal bank, not to mention the unintended consequences and potential risks of putting the WST at the future mercy of the various federal banking agencies, such as the FDIC, the OCC, CFPB, and so on. With that, where do my cautions come from? Partly from when I was a banker, but also as a retailer, whenever we managed our own credit card portfolio, we actually applied for a federal charter to be able to manage our portfolio ourselves. At that time, I was managing payments for Kohl's department stores. We had more than 30 million credit cards in issuance and had all of the infrastructure to manage our own federal charter and to be able to be approved for a federal charter. We were delayed again, and ultimately had to pursue other means, right, to be able to support it. My cautionary statement here is that you have to be careful, and I know the commission is already aware of this, but you have to be careful of the unintended consequences of trying to work with the federal government in relation to something like this, because of the delays, because of the unintended consequences, and the other results that could take place in the background, such as the proposed acts that are in Congress right now that would potentially be reconciled by the time that we would be ready to launch. Those could be reconciled in time and limit the issuance of stable tokens in the future to only federally chartered banks. So I think that another thing that we need to be considering is our fast mover opportunity here to be able to leverage the local Wyoming banks and banking institutions, credit unions that we have across Wyoming today, and make sure that we keep that in the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carruthers. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
I think up next,
Scott and Joe.
yeah. Scott Moore, can you hear me? Are you
Yes,
online?
Can you hear me?
We can. Again,
Okay,
just please
great.
introduce yourself and who you're with. Thank you.
Sure thing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Scott Moeller. I am one of the organizers of the American Crypto Fed DAO. I'm here with Troy and Joe at the Merchant Advisory Group Conference. So our apologies that we aren't able to attend there live today. We're with, I think it's around 1,200 merchants and down payment leads down in Atlanta. And we're talking to them all about the Wyoming stable token. So yeah, so very, very exciting. We do have a couple of comments on the business plan, but I'd like to add on to what Troy's been talking about and Ms. DeVore. My first comment is similar looking at the issuance of the token. And my question is it feasible for Wyoming's community banks to create speedy bank subsidiaries so that they can issue Wyoming stable token on behalf of the commission? And given that the Wyoming's community banks and credit unions already have an existing correspondent bank relationship, so that way they're a new speedy subsidiary would be able to connect to the Fed payment system. So would be able to leverage their existing relationships that they have versus needing to establish a new one. And has that been given consideration? So I'm not sure if that question goes to Mr. Ravel or who.
Mr. Ravel, are you okay taking a crack at that one?
I don't know that I should be speaking for the commission in this regard, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to chat with folks, but I feel like we're kind of broaching into the work of the commission, and I don't want to represent them here by myself.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so we do have two members of the select committee that are both commissioners and select committee members, and they're in an interesting and beneficial position, I think, for the state. Certainly, we appreciate that. But yeah, and I appreciate that, Mr. Ravel, that can't be speaking on behalf of the commission. So what I'll answer on behalf of the select committee, Mr. Co-Chairman, is that what Mr. Moeller is talking about is certainly something that is being considered by the commission. The idea of exactly what level of organization, how can it be structured? I think that obviously when we wrote the legislation and included flexible definitions in such a way that speedy banks would be appropriate financial institutions to carry out a lot of the work, that was not an accident. That was the intent of us structuring it that way, but knowing at the same time that it may not be possible. We might have challenges and we might have to look for alternatives. So we structured it in a flexible way to get feedback and to figure out what the best path forward is. I wish that our federal challenges with the Speedy Bank were remedied as soon as possible. And I have a feeling this conversation would be a lot easier if we were already through that and out to the other side with successful master accounts for the Speedy Banks. But I certainly hear what you're saying and what others have testified, that tying into our state chartered banks is going to be of great benefit to the state, and that we have to contemplate our own ability to regulate those state chartered banks and interact with those state chartered banks in a way that is far superior to the way that we interact with the feds. But as we stand right now, that's what the Stable Token Commission is wrestling with. And I know that you've been attending the Stable Token Commission meetings too, and so we're all trying to provide that input over in the commission side, and I think everyone's listening to those concerns and trying to figure out a way to navigate through there. So more to come, but appreciate that input. And I certainly share those concerns. I think we all would love it if we could just wave our wand and the Speedy Bank is working correctly and we could run it through there.
Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Miller, any further remarks?
Yeah, yes, I had one further, and this is kind of related to just it's kind of a foundational level, and I understand that we're in a position right now where we're only reviewing the business plan 1.0. We haven't seen the 2.0 yet, so things are still in flux. But as I'm reading through the 1.0 business plan, I see references related to resellers of the Wyoming stable token, and resellers to me equates to fees. And because of that, I'm a little concerned seeing the concept of resellers being baked into the architecture of the plan. And to give example, one of the leading points when we talked about the issuance of a Wyoming stable token was using that Wyoming stable token for payment of fees to the state, paying your property taxes to the state, and paying that in a Wyoming stable token in order to avoid the 3% fee that Wyoming citizens have to pay for if they're doing a visa related transaction. So it's just a concern in general, seeing that resellers are being built into that rather than that last concept when I talked about a community bank using a Speedy. They're an issuer, they're not a reseller. They're issuing the token. So that's just a comment that I wanted to bring to the select committee and share that about.
Thank you, Mr. Mueller. I think there's one more person, Clarissa. No? No one else online? Any further questions for Mr. Mueller? Seeing none, we appreciate your time and your attention to this matter. Let's see, it's 10:15. I guess we're tad behind schedule. Mr. Bishop, are you on a tight schedule? Can we take a 5-minute break? Okay, yeah, let's go ahead and just take a quick 5-minute break. Mr. Ord?
I apologize. We did miss Mr. Joe as well online.
We'll get him right after the break.
Sounds good.
Okay, folks, let's go ahead and resume our meeting. Up next, we've got the Division of Banking, Mr. Bishop. Go for it.
Good morning. For those of you that don't know, Jeremiah Bishop, the State Banking Commissioner, head of the Division of Banking. I believe the first topic is open banking. Just an update on where we are with that. So just a background, this law directed the banking division to adopt rules and regulations regulating the collection, use, and disclosure of customer data in open banking, as long as it's consistent with all applicable state and federal law. So last meeting, I think our update was we wanted to touch base with the CFPB to see where they were with their rulemaking processes and maybe get some ideas from them. We were able to do that, and we got several ideas. Two items that I think this committee should address. The first one is the open banking law uses the term customer, but it doesn't define whether a customer only means an individual or also includes businesses. Through discussions, I think it's implied that it generally means individuals, but it's not explicitly defined. When we talked with the CFPB, we identified this area as maybe being something that could be consistent. Their proposed rules is definitely only individuals. It does not affect businesses. So having that explicit definition of what a customer is in the open banking bill could be a good change to that bill in the next session. The next area is
Mr. Bishop.
Yeah.
Real quick, if I might.
Yeah,
I feel like we can, I think it's pretty similar. So just asking us to clarify in legislation whether a new customer means a business or individuals. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think that's a very simple change. Just clarifying that change, I think would be a very easy one.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
The second area we've talked about, I know last interim session and during the session, and this topic of data scope. It's a very important issue. So that's the scope of data that upon the express written consent, the bank can share with a third party financial service provider. There's really no definition of that within the law itself. It's very broad. That has a broad definition of customer data to mean a customer's banking transaction and other financial data. It doesn't identify what customer data a bank may provide access to, or if it's just broadly all customer data as defined. I think it's my understanding is the intent is for the bank to only share the customer data that is necessary for the customer to receive a product or service from that third party, instead of just all data. Like I said, this is generally referred to data scope. Should banks limit third parties to access only the data necessary to provide that product or service, or is it just all customer data? This is also done. This is a topic is not exactly dialed in at the federal level at all. It's a pretty broad topic, but I think the general consensus is if you allow it to have it allow all data instead of limiting it, it could cause some burdens on smaller institutions with those legacy systems. So this area of data scope, it's something that we were going to address in rules, but it's a very important piece, I think. So if it's something that maybe if you disagree with kind of how I describe that as limiting that, it could be addressed as an amendment as well.
But Mr. Bishop, real quick, does the CFPB or any of those 1033 regs talk about specifically that, where there's the specific data or just at a broad, all-encompassing level?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It does. Their publication they put out, I think it was in March of this year, has several pages on that. They have not settled on it on one way or the other, to my knowledge. It is more of just a discussion and some of the maybe consequences or ramifications from one way or the other. But that's something that there's, I think at the federal level, they have, like I said, they have not decided on yet.
Imagine the feds being wishy-washy on something. Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you. So on that point, if we were to draft something statutory, we would obviously want to make sure that there's some flexibility there. And I think the language that you were providing of, only the necessary data is a good basis for that. Obviously, that I think is appropriate and consistent with the express written consent, so that maybe it's provided or detailed and clarified in the express written consent. And then perhaps subject to rule and regulation so that you can provide some flesh on the bones of that. Is that what you would see being a reasonable statutory change that we could put into place in this upcoming session?
Mr. Bishop.
Great, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman. Yeah, I think that's kind of what I had in mind as well. I think that would be consistent. I think that'd make things a little bit clearer on the law level, and then we could expand a little bit more in rulemaking as well, rather than just doing it all in rulemaking.
Senator Furphy, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask, at the federal level, are they talking opting in on this data and potentially limiting what you opt in for at the federal level? Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bishop, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Furphy, as far as just make sure I understand correctly, opting in as to what type of information is shared, or just opting into the just open banking in general?
Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question is both ways. If they opt in, that means all of their data is acceptable, or can they opt in on a limited basis, only certain data? Here, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, okay. Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Furphy. As far as what the CFPB is doing, as far as opting into what information is shared or who it's shared with, things like that, I'm not sure where they are with that. Again, we don't have final rules from them yet. I think our understanding of what the Wyoming law stated is it very much is an opt-in, like that express written consent must happen before the bank shares that information. And then this proposal is then going a step further, is not only opting in, but telling you what information can be shared. So I'm not sure if that's consistent with what the CFPB is doing, but I do believe that was the intent of this bill all along.
Mr. Bishop, it certainly was. Senator Furphy, any further follow-up?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. No, I'm just trying to determine the difference between what's proposed at the federal level and what we did. Mr. Chairman, I think that is exactly what we were intending, is all data you have to sign in at the state level. So thank you.
Mr. Bishop, please proceed.
Yeah, so those were the two items of, I think, amendments that could come up if this committee at least able to discuss it. I think we're still on track. We're still looking into our goal, again, is to still do rulemaking by July 1st of next year. I think depending on where, maybe see some draft language on this on what might go through at the next session. But I think we're still definitely on track to finalize that rulemaking on time.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions, and I appreciate this follow-up. And the first is with regard to the process and where the CFPB is in their process. What does their timeline look like? How robust are their rules? And can you give us a little more insight?
Mr. Bishop.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair. To my knowledge, they do not have a set timeline established yet. I believe they were still trying to do final rules by next year. However, they've definitely not committed to that yet. So I think it is still up in the air. I've asked some questions of that from other agencies as well, and they kind of say the same thing. They don't really know exactly when these final rules will come out. The March publication they put out was the last, to my knowledge, the last issue that they put out. I don't think they have any updated information since March.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Are you aware of any other states that have passed legislation similar to ours at this point?
Mr. Bishop.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, not that I know of. I've asked several other states and they've not heard anything proposed or even being talked about yet.
Okay.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, do you see any inconsistencies on the horizon between the approach that we're taking and the expected approach of the CFPB?
Mr. Bishop.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair. I think since the bill, it is fairly limited as it is right now, so it does give me very broad discretion over what goes into rules. I can kind of develop whether or not it's consistent with what information I have from the CFPB. So my goal is to make it as close as possible. Maybe if there's things that they aren't uncertain of, maybe just establish that. But if there is information that the CFPB is very certain will be included in their final rule, I can go ahead and do my best to adopt that in rulemaking to be consistent. So I think right now I don't see any major issues as far as being inconsistent, but obviously we'll have to wait till the rules come out.
But Mr. Chairman, we don't necessarily know whether they'll go opt in, opt out, or how that's going. That's an ongoing conversation, as I understand it.
Commissioner Bishop.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. To my understanding, I think it is. They may have, it's a long paper. I can go back into it and I can provide more comment on that next time if that works. But to my knowledge, I think it's still in the air, but I can definitely finalize that.
And
Co-chair.
Mr. Chairman, the final question I would have is, so with our legislation and with the position as the state that's kind of leading this effort along with the CFPB, has that opened up a dialogue between you and them in a way that empowers Wyoming to kind of have a say in this process, or how is that interaction with the CFPB? How has that experience gone for you?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman. Yeah, our the meeting we have had with CFPB, I think it was very beneficial. They seemed very open, at least to help us understand their rules. I'm not sure how well that will go going the other way. But they do have the CFPB does have a designated team to deal with state regulators and legislative bodies for issues. So I think this is something they've definitely dealt with in the past. So.
We like it when the feds are compliant with what we're trying to do at the state level. Members, any other questions on open banking for Commissioner Bishop? David, how do you feel about that in terms of just getting a draft? It sounds like this is pretty minor. Commissioner, maybe if you just specify it. So it sounds like the scope of data stuff, you can do that in rulemaking with what you have on the books, or do you want us to include that as well in addition to the customer?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, that is definitely something that if there's an amendment that does not go through to clarify data scope, that is definitely something I will address in rulemaking. It's just more of the question of that's a very important issue. So should that be held by the legislature or through rulemaking? That's the main question.
So I interpret that as that Commissioner would be more comfortable with us taking first crack at it. Dave, would that be a problem for you guys on your end? Sounds like it would be pretty straightforward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my understanding, there are two asks here for a bill draft. One, to clarify whether customer means a business or an individual. And then one, to limit the scope of the customer data using language along the lines of that which is necessary to receive the product or service. Is that a fair summary?
Sounds pretty good to me, Mr. Co-Chair.
And Mr. Co-Chair, working with Division of Banking to get the language so that it's consistent with what we're seeing in maybe some early drafts of the CFPB, using the same terminology, matching that up. Hopefully that's short and could be something we could consider in November. It's never a great idea to have a first look at a draft in the last meeting, but do you feel like we would be able to get something, Mr. Bishop, so that it's ready for prime time in November and relatively simple and straightforward?
Mr. Bishop.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair. Yes, I think these two, like you said, I think they're fairly straightforward amendments. I think that's definitely something we can definitely work with and be comfortable with come November.
Excellent. Well, I'll move to make that drafting request.
Is there a second? It's been seconded, Senator Furphy. Seeing no objection, let's go ahead and just do a voice vote of the members. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That motion carries. So next on our agenda. Yeah. Senate File 140 from the 2020 session, Banking Division classification and salary exemptions. Mr. Hopkinson, are you okay coming up and maybe walking us through? I will certainly say the backstory here, the genesis is that at its inception, the banking division was there to regulate our state banks, to promote our two-tier banking system and work with our community banks. And they've certainly done a great job of that over the years. But as our economy evolves, so do banks, and so do the demands of the customers and the roles that these banks need to do. And I'm of the opinion, and I believe many of us here on this committee are, that to do that job and to do it well and to interface with these new institutions, whether they be speedies or the like, money transmitters, et cetera, that they need the staff and personnel to do so. And you can't just go out on the street and ask these people to come work for you. These are folks who have a lot of expertise and take a lot of years to get those expertise that they need to be effective regulators. And so the idea behind this is that we allow the division to have the ability and the money to offer competitive salaries to get this type of talent on board. Skilled regulators, they're hard to come by and they're hard to keep. And so that was the idea, is to kind of put this ability for the commission to hire some of this talent, some of these folks, and pay them more aggressively and give the commission more flexibility to bring on some of this type of personnel. So that's the genesis here. Mr. Hopkinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Hopkinson with the Legislative Service Office, just taking a look at Senate File 140 from 2020 and what ended up being Enrolled Act number 68. The bill is fairly straightforward, and essentially what it does is it takes from the A&I and puts with the Division of Banking the salaries and classifications for certain employees. So it requires and goes into amends 13-1-605 with the state banking board, and requires the banking board to establish personnel classifications and salaries for the Division of Banking in consultation with the director and subject to legislative appropriation. Those classifications and salaries are required to be commensurate with other state and federal financial regulators. And the specialized skills required would be defined by the state banking commissioner. Those classifications and salaries are excluded from the classifications of the compensation plan under Wyoming statutes 9210. Well, and those have actually been renumbered now, so those would be tweaked, but through essentially what other executive branch employees are subject to. And it provides that upon the creation of the classifications and salaries and prior to the increase of any person's salary, the division shall report the classification and salaries to the Joint Appropriations Committee. And that report shall include any estimated increase in requested appropriations and the duties of each person for which that classification shall apply, including specific skills required to skillfully and competently fill the position, and any other information requested by the Joint Appropriations Committee. Salary increases shall be included in the department's exception budget. Section 2, provided that no increase in any person's salary as created by this act would be effective essentially until or unless approved by the governor. Now, the governor, just to briefly go over, he did veto, and he had primarily two reasons for that. First was concerns about separation of powers issues with the requirement of having this be sent to the Joint Appropriations Committee. And he felt that it was unclear what exactly the Joint Appropriations Committee was supposed to do with that, or what authority or control they would have. And so he vetoed it on that basis. And then he felt that it was unnecessary and felt that the existing processes in place were sufficient to provide effective employees for the Division of Banking. With that, I would stand for any questions.
Committee, any questions? Senator Furphy, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you clarify for me, are these salaries from fees charged to the banks in our state? So they're a little different than some other of the salaries in our state. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Hopkinson.
Mr. Chairman, I would defer to the director on that question. I'm not entirely sure.
Mr. Bishop, please go forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Furphy. So just to understand the question, just clarification on basically where do our fees come from and what is funding the salaries within the Division of Banking? Yes, so we are a self-funded agency, other fund. All of our fees come from supervisory fees, licensing fees, renewal fees, things like that of banks, trust companies, and other entities we regulate, such as money transmitters, consumer lenders, mortgage companies. Everything we regulate, they pay us the fees. And so we are completely self-funded.
Senator Furphy, did you have follow-up? Ms. Co-Chair.
And that rate setting for those fees, I assume, goes through the commission and is therefore with the feedback of the served community. Is that accurate?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, yes, the majority of our fees are set by rule. And so it'd go through the change in rule process to change those fees. Some are still in statute, but very minimal.
Members, any further follow-up? Any questions for Mr. Hopkinson? Please proceed. What was that? I think we're done. Committee, what's your pleasure? Ms. Co-Chair.
So, Mr. Chairman, we are bringing this because, when we look at the letter, the veto letter, there was the concern about the separation of powers, but the other was that this can be handled through the process, and the hope was then that it would be handled through the process. And so what I would ask Commissioner Bishop is perhaps to talk about, I know you can't be advocating for or against the bill in any way, but I can certainly hopefully ask you some questions about your salaries and how they relate to market and whether you have an easy time or perhaps a challenging time recruiting new employees and maintaining those employees. So if you can tell us a little bit about those fact-based, data-based bits of information about your employees and their salaries, I would appreciate that.
Mr. Bishop, please.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair. Yes, so definitely appreciate the committee looking into this. It's definitely a problem that I think needs to be addressed. I will say it's not just a salary problem. There are other aspects. It's just more flexibility in general. Obviously, like Mr. Chair, like you mentioned, we regulate entities that are fast moving and innovative. And so to effectively regulate them, I think we need to also. So yes, salaries is a big part of that, but also changing salaries as needed, adding positions quickly when needed, and also the actual position classification, making those changes as needed. All those are kind of the overall problem of getting qualified staff. So some of the things we have been able to do, we were able to actually increase examiner salary this last session. We did a supplemental request. Again, this is our examiners only. And we were able to bring them up to an average of surrounding states for similar positions. Now this was a fairly significant feat. I think this has never been done. I think we were very proud we were able to do this. The governor helped, the legislative definitely helped. I do think that will help retaining employees and attracting new employees in the future. However, that was a one-time increase. So again, that's never happened before. So again, in 10 years, we may be back to the exact same problem we were before because we still aren't able to adjust as needed. As far as classifications, we're still at the same job classification as we have, I think, for a long time now. We're within the Department of Audit, so we're classified as auditors. Our director, I think he made some comments last time. He's open to maybe changing. He was definitely open with the salary change between us and the rest of our department. But as far as actually getting those reclassified, my understanding is he's still working with A&I to get that done, and I don't think there's been any movement on that. I'm not part of those conversations, so I don't know what the issues or holdups are, but I don't believe that's moved forward at all. If I might add one more thing with this potential bill, just to be aware of, is this bill, it put salaries under the banking board. So the state banking board is made up primarily of bankers that we regulate. And so that would create a very significant conflict of interest, having the bankers that we regulate set salaries and classifications of the examiners. So that's something to definitely be aware of.
It's not fair.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. That's yeah, better than the legislature, yeah. Do you have any suggestions and alternatives for an appropriate practice for that deconflicts the process?
Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's something I don't think I can answer. I think that definitely needs to be set by you all. That's getting very close to towing that line on my part.
Understood. Mr. Chairman, a different question. So with open banking and the work there, it seems like that's being met with internal resources and existing resources. One of the discussions we've had is the amount of work that it takes to get a Speedy Bank up and running. And that has actually been to some degree paused the workload because of the master account situation at the Federal Reserve. But that is one of the concerns driving this, is the ability to be responsive if there are a large number of applications. Can you comment on your staff numbers right now, the number of FTEs, and what that might look like if, and I know that you've had a lot of conversations that are confidential conversations with interested parties, but if those interested parties ended up being interested or actually wanted to then file for state charters, maybe perhaps a little discussion about the workload that would require and how you might handle it.
Mr. Bishop.
Yep, Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair. So yes, I believe we talked last session about would we be able to handle a great inflow in SPDI applicants? And the answer was no. Currently, our structure, we separate into two areas. Our compliance group, that's our non-bank entities, money transmitters, consumer lenders, and mortgage companies. Then we have our safety and soundness area, that's banks, trust companies, and SPDIs. Right now, I have 6 bank and trust company examiners. All of them, I'd say they do a very good job, but very inexperienced. That's where we saw significant turnover over the last 4 years. So not just processing applications, but also just conducting those examinations. Once SPDIs become operational, there is a lot of work that needs to be done on the supervisory side of conducting visitations, examinations, approving any incidental activity, just making sure they're operating in a safe and sound manner. It takes up a lot of time. And it's not just SPDIs. We also, as you know, a lot of trust companies. We've actually grown the number of trust companies from, I think, 5 in 2015 to 28 right now, soon to be 29 or more by the end of the year. A lot of those trust companies are also in the digital asset space and in innovative space. So that takes a lot of resources on our end to do both Speedies, trust companies, and banks with an existing examination staff, and getting people to basically stick around. It takes 3 years to fully train a bank examiner on community banks, much less SPDIs and novel activities. So it takes a lot of resources on our end just to try to get people to stay. And that has been a significant problem so far.
Mr. Bishop. So again, this was 2020. And the issue was you need this technical staff, didn't have the classification nor the money to offer this types of folks that you need. Sounds like there's some improvement last year, but where are we at now? I mean, how understaffed are we in our safety and soundness and these functions that they have to perform? I guess let me say this, maybe start off by describing what's ideal, what's proficient, and where we're at now in that range.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So from 2020 till now, yes, the salary amount has definitely gone up. I would say one thing, it's not that we don't have the funds available, it's a spending authority to spend them as needed. We have the cash, we have the revenue, we just need to be able to spend it. So as far as just experience, we have vacant positions right now. We had a lot, like I said, a lot of turnover from 2020. I think we've had probably, well, on examiner positions, there is no examiner who was here prior to 2019 who's still here now. They're qualified, but we do have empty positions that we can posts and hopefully get somebody qualified to apply. Most of these are senior level positions. It's difficult to attract talent at the top level of examiner with experience to come in and apply for that. We've tried, we haven't had much success. So our plan is we have to hire entry levels, train them for several years, and then fill that senior examiner position. So right now, staffing, I think I have 6 vacancies at the moment that could go to examiners on that side. Again, I have to break those up between banks and our non-bank side, but I'm able to do that easily. So with those 6 empty positions, it's just a matter of attracting the talent to fill them.
And so real quick, Mr. Bishop, so you have 6 vacancies in these senior levels, the examiner positions for these types of institutions. What are you offering now, salary wise, and what is roughly needed to get these people to apply with interest?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As far as what would be needed, I am not sure what that number is, just because I think it depends on the industry right now. Right now, I think our senior levels pay approximately $74,000 a year. Our entry level is a little bit definitely, but I think we're in the 45 to 50 range. So that's what we can offer right now. Again, that's actually increased significantly from a year ago. What it would take to get qualified people, I could not answer that.
I would quite a bit more than what you're offering is my guess, please, Mr. Co-Chair.
That was kind of what I was thinking. I understand and think it's an appropriate approach to try and grow the internal structure and then get them to move into the senior positions. But do you feel that the salary range for those senior positions would keep those individuals? Or based on the salaries that I heard, I would certainly conclude that you're providing a training program for folks that are going to go into the private sector and be very well qualified when they get there. I guess, and we may need to know more at a later meeting if we can get some industry averages, but to me, those senior positions seem like the conversation needs to start 150K, like literally twice as much. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on what industry competition is in that space, if there's anything else you can provide.
Mr. Bishop.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair. Yeah, that might be something we can talk about at a later meeting. I would like, again, go back to it's not just setting a one-time salary amount, it's being flexible. I think that would be a benefit to fixing that problem. Being able to offer higher than what's currently allowed or what's needed, depending on the applicant, would be helpful. Being able to maybe create different classification numbers. Right now we have 3 levels of examiners. If I could expand that, again, I'd have to work with AI on that to have more than 3 levels of examiners, again, to maybe get that higher level. But again, it's more the flexibility that's the issue at the moment.
Let's do Senator Nethercott and then Mr. Ravel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a point of clarity. And you are unable to do that with A&I. You have to go through the Department of Audit. Is that correct?
Mr. Bishop.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, Senator Nethercott. So yes, the Division of Banking, we're a division of the Department of Audit. And so everything must go through our director. And then he works with A&I for for classifications. And whether it's salary exceptions, we go through the budget exception process to get those set. That's what we did this last year. But yes, since we're part of the Department of Audit, that's who we go through.
Senator Nethercott, follow up. Mr. Ravel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions for the commissioner, but first, a quick disclosure. The firm that I work for is regulated by the commissioner. And in fact, we have the distinct pleasure of hosting 5 auditors this week in our offices. So, but my question is, what is the time frame right now, Mr. Commissioner, for the approval of a speedy, a publicly chartered trust company, and then a private family trust company? If you could estimate those, please.
That's right, Mr. Ravel, there's a distraction. Could you repeat that question again?
Yes, I'm curious for the time required for the Division of Banking on average to approve a Speedy Bank, we're one to walk in today, a publicly chartered trust company, which many digital asset companies will use that regulatory entity, and then a private family trust company.
Mr. Bishop.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Revel. So for a private family trust company, that's a faster process. We have a draft review process. We try to see a draft business plan, draft application. It generally takes 2 to 3 months to review that. Then they make the official application. Those are simply because that does not go to the banking board. I'm the approval authority on those private family trust companies, and we have 60 days from receipt of a application to issue the approval or denial of those trust companies. Once that is approved, then they must become operational. That could take 1 to 3 months, depending on the company and their turnaround of getting everything they need to in place to actually operate. Public trust companies, similar process, only that does go to the banking board. So same thing, 2 to 3 months of a review of the draft business plan application. Very much depending on the complexity of the company. If it's a novel activity that they're trying to do, this is definitely expanded. Start to finish though, a traditional public trust company, from the time we get a draft application to the time the banking board approves the charter, could be 6 to 9 months, with another 2 to 3 months of getting everything in place to operate. That we approve, that we issue that certificate of authority to operate. So 9 to 12 months could be a little less, but I think 9 to 12 months is doable for a public trust company. For an SPDI, assuming it's engaged in digital asset activity, the approval process, same, I would say 12 to 15 months. Where a lot of the time comes in on them is getting that certificate of authority to operate. Once they're approved, they must have everything in place to actually open the doors, including policies, procedures, management team, core systems, deciding what they're going to do for payments, things like that. That's an unknown number. That's up to the company. It's up to just the federal posture, I guess, on where the SPDR is with that. So 12, I'd say 12 to 15 months to get approved, and then depending on the company to open longer than after that, on top of that.
Mr. Revelle, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if and when Ms. Long and Custodia are successful in gaining Fed Master account access, and assuming there is a increase in activity of speedy applications, what happens to the approval time for those entities? Can you handle them concurrently, or does it become a situation where it needs to be handled sequentially and you create a backlog?
Mr. Bishop.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Great question. So in the past, I would say we could only handle one SPDI application at a time. So again, that's from the official application to the banking board meeting. We can review multiple draft business plans at a time, but actually going through that investigation process is very time consuming. And so we can only have one do that at a time. Now, we have recently taken one examiner position and separated them to work on applications, to do full-time work on mostly trust company application, but everything else we handle, branch applications, change in control, things like that, just to have one person full-time, because historically, the individuals conducting the investigations on these speedies were the commissioner, the deputy commissioner on safety and soundness, and our general counsel. Examiners, they have to do exams. And so we can't really pull them off to investigate these charter applications. Not full-time now. We have one doing that full-time because it's needed. So going forward, we may be able to handle possibly two, but it's limited to that, I'd say, at this point.
Mr. Revelle, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Commissioner, if the dam broke tomorrow and there were 10 speedy applications, did I hear that it would be somewhere between 5 and 10 years before those are approved?
Mr. Bishop.
I did not do the math. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did not do the math on that. I will say, just when historically, when the SPDI first happened, we received we were meeting with companies weekly on this. We have received lots of draft business plans that did not make it to application. And I think companies were surprised that time to get through that draft process actually took significantly longer, not because of us, but because they needed to meet the expectations. But if they were all very well put together business plans, applications, yes, it would take a very long time.
Any further follow-up?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other committee members? Or Mr. Co-Chair, please.
Yeah. We don't have the last question, which I guess maybe we can get public comment on also, but I just want to make certain that there's no resistance from the community that you serve to this as well. I mean, our state chartered banks have, based on my understanding, been interested in seeing higher salaries and more personnel, because that facilitates the business practices of our regular state chartered banks too. Is that an accurate description?
Mr. Bishop?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, yes. I think our traditional community banks have been pushing for quite some time for increased resources. They like establishing relationships with examiners. They like seeing the same examiners in 3 years when we go back in. So the salary increase we were able to do this last year partly came because of pressure from the industry to the governor's office. That's my understanding, to I think the legislative body as a whole. I believe that's what made that possible. Now we may need to increase fees at some point to cover some of that, but we haven't increased fees in a very long time. So I don't want to speak for the banks, but from what I've seen so far, I think they are open to getting us some more resources.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Any further questions before we move on to public comment? Seeing that, Senator Furphy, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just might make a comment regarding, since my career was in banking for a long time, one of the issues I got frustrated with was we'd get a compliance officer fully trained on the regulations and they were good. Then the regulators would hire them away from the bank. So my question to you, Mr. Commissioner, is have you looked at the salaries in the banks for their compliance officers? That data is readily available. And that's what it's going to take to hire the top compliance officers into your office to reduce the training time on the state regulations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bishop.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Furphy. Yes, we do track some of those salaries. Again, that's more for traditional compliance officers at traditional community banks. I will say that I have never hired anybody who was a compliance officer at a bank before, mainly because I think it'd be a pay cut. So we do that is the industry we would look at. Again, for traditional banks, again, novel activities, we'd have to look at those officers for maybe our SPDIs or our trust companies or other entities in that space. And then also for salary data, we look at other states a lot. Well, that's readily available to us. That's how we use to increase our salaries in our district. That information is public to me, but also the federal agencies, primarily the Federal Reserve and the FDIC. It's very similar job descriptions. So, but they definitely do pay quite a bit higher than we do.
Seeing no follow-up. Let's go ahead and move. We're a little bit behind schedule, but yeah, let's go ahead and move to public comment. I think let's go in the room first. I think. Thank you for coming to this committee meeting. And we know who you are, but just state your name and who you're with, please. Yes, the button right there till it turns green. Perfect.
All right. Hi, guys. I'm Jade Barker with Silicon Prairie, and we've been looking at doing some business here in Minnesota, we're from Minnesota, looking at doing some business here in Wyoming. And definitely one of the things that we've looked at from our state is things like, does it take 5 or 10 years to get through something. So I guess my question or comment was about, is there the possibility in those particular examiner roles to have consultants brought in if you can't have full-time people and there's 6 openings?
Ms. Barker, I know that banking division, as do all executive branch agencies, do have the ability to bring on AWAC or contract staff as well. There may be specific provisions as they relate to the division, but they all do have that ability.
Yeah, I think sometimes too, from industry, a lot of people are just not interested in working for government based on it having a bit of a bad taste. So you might have a bigger candidate pool if you were able to have consultants for that. Just my thoughts.
Committee, any questions for Ms. Barker? Seeing none, I thank you very much for your testimony.
Thanks, guys.
Is there any other in-room testimony? Clarissa, do we have anybody in Zoom land? Seeing none, committee, what's your pleasure? Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I think we should at least have something to consider next time. And I think perhaps the way to do that would be to redraft the previous bill, removing the portion that refers the process through the Appropriations Committee to resolve the separation of powers aspect of the veto letter, and then just draw the focus over to the salary levels and position hires. So that easy change, you basically just take out one sentence of the previous bill draft and then update the statutory references so that they're accurate. And that becomes a 1-paragraph bill for us to take a look at next time. So I'd make that motion to draft that bill for our next discussion, so that we can contemplate it and maybe have some discussion also with the executive branch about this problem and this concern. I take Commissioner Bishop's concern about it being the banking board that makes the decision as a good point, but I don't have right now a good alternative. I don't know if anybody on the committee has anything in mind that is an appropriate approach, but I'm open to that if it's a good choice.
Mr.
Senator
Chair,
Medicott, please.
yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I think a couple things that we have to be very cognizant of. We're hearing a very narrowly tailored concern that is warranted. And certainly I agree with that we need to increase compensation in order to attract qualified and additional talent into the division of banking. Every single state agency is struggling with the same exact challenge. They all would like to be exempted out of A&I and have their own determinations as to compensation and classification, which I would want that as well if I were a director of an agency. The problem that creates is pretty profound across the state, where then you have significant inequities amongst public employees. The argument that is distinguishable in some aspects here is that the division is able to pay for its compensation based on its own fees. But that is actually not that unique. And there are other state agencies that get a majority of their funding from fee generation through their own work. And I would say all of the statewide electeds would want that as well. And then this precipitous fall of autonomous employee compensation, and then we have a lot of disparity. That may be a good thing and a road you want to go down. I think probably it is unwise. And so we probably need to think a little bit more carefully about how to provide the necessary increase in compensation to the division, which I support. As the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, I support providing more compensation to those very skilled and necessary employees, both for private industry and for services to our state. So how we do that moving forward, I think needs to be carefully considered. I do not support having the banking board determine compensation. I do not support having the division itself unilaterally determine that compensation. And actually, I think the governor is wrong, that it is appropriate for the legislative branch to determine state employee compensation and how state funds are used based on state implemented fees, right? Whether or not some of those fees we've authorized to allow to be conducted via rule, we can certainly take that back. And so it's very important to recognize it's a state structured system, and that oversight is appropriately placed within the legislature and the JAC committee, which evaluates all other state employee compensation. And so I do think that keeping it there is important. I think what this bill draft was intending to do was to take it out of the Department of Audit, because that's in effect what it does. And I do think there's probably some challenges there without stepping on toes associated with the unique needs within the division in this very specialized space that we have created through this committee within the division. So whether or not the Division of Banking understood that to be the case or asked for that, that is in effect what we did by having the division report directly to JAC as opposed through the director of the Department of Audit. There's some wisdom in that. And also for the division to speak directly with A&I to have those very specific compensation and job classification conversations, to be the own advocate for the own division on that front instead of having to go through the department. So I think that's wise to keep that there and to have that oversight go through JAC. So I think we invite the governor's office back to explore more thoughtfully that veto language, which I disagree with.
Okay.
And that's my strategy moving forward.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Co-Chairman.
I'll amend the motion so that that language remains in. Was it seconded?
I don't think there was a second.
All right, well, that'll be the motion then, is to leave the language as it is and conform it so that we have a bill draft for next time, so that we can have that discussion. And during that time, I'd encourage the committee also to think of an alternative mechanism to the banking commissioners as far as the salary setting entity, but we can have that conversation. It's fortunately a very simple bill draft, a one paragraph, so we can have that next time.
Is there a second?
Second.
It has been seconded. In terms of further discussion, I think the auspicious chair of Senate Appropriations makes a really good point. I think, you know, these confusing and sticky situations are always paved with good intentions, right? That I do think, though, and certainly in this case, and certainly you can make it to other agencies within the state, this is market driven. We have market participants who are saying, hey, we need skilled regulators. We need capable people who know how to interact with us. And so we can do our job and conduct business in the state versus us just saying, well, they need to get paid more because they probably should, which is not certainly a valid argument, but I think the genesis of this, and certainly a lot of the feedback we've gotten, is that this is a market thing. And this is the market coming to us and saying, hey, we need this. You are not meeting our needs. And so I think there's a lot of wiggle room, I think, within how we get there. But I think that's certainly informing my thought process as we approach this, whether it stays within the Department of Audit or otherwise. But certainly, I think, you know, there's 100 different ways to achieve an objective, right? So long as we get there, I think that's the most important thing. And I certainly agree with the chairwoman that engaging the executive branch and having that nuanced, thoughtful discussion, I think, is really important between now and November 20th or when our next meeting is. So, Senator Nethercott.
Mr. Co-Chairman, I don't disagree with your comments. I would just push back that the challenges associated with the division are not unique to any state agency. So contrary to popular belief, all of the government agencies serve the public and private business. And so when they're slow and inefficient, that harms the public and private business. And so the same conversation is happening at epic levels with the Department of Environmental Quality that does industrial siting, right, for large industrial projects within our state associated with mining and oil and gas development. Air quality division needs 20 employees, right, and an increased compensation. And so this is not a unique challenge that the division is facing. It is unique in the sense that we have created, this committee is responsible for creating a great deal of its challenges through our innovative approaches. and needing to have really cutting edge talent within our state for what may be typically not seen as cutting edge. And so this unique function that we face here, but again, I would urge caution in trying to distinguish or justify our actions that this is being driven by private business. That's true, but all other needs across public employees across the state are also in the same boat.
Mr. Kutcher.
Thanks. And I wanted to echo that, I serve on the Minerals Committee, and we hear from the stakeholders that are interested in actually having the air quality division full of its employees and the land quality division full of its employees, so that their permitting processes can go smoothly and so that they can be responsive. And those industry stakeholders, even if it's not paying the bills through fees always, they're still paying the bills and they know they're paying the bills. So it is a problem throughout government. Oil and Gas Conservation Commission is paid for through fees. So when they're doing their work and don't have their employees fully up to speed and aren't being paid as much as they could be, so they're getting poached by industry as well. It's the same situation. So there's no question that this is not unique to the space that we're looking at. But as Senator Nethercutt pointed out, this is the area of the space that we as a select committee are tasked with looking at, and that's why it's on our radar. I don't know that we have the authority to fix it government wide, but I think that the step we're taking in bringing this proposal can hopefully further that conversation, because something definitely needs to be done here. As Mr. Reville pointed out, if we have several Speedy Bank applications coming through concurrently and then need to supervise those entities, we quite honestly just don't have the personnel to get that going. And we have to have a remedy for that from the perspective of the select committee to move things forward. So it is a much bigger problem, and that's your task then. You just go ahead and fix that, my dear friend Senator.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Senator Nethercutt, please.
Thank you. I seconded the bill draft and look forward
Yeah.
to continuing to work this, primarily because this committee created this challenge for the Division of Banking. And so we also need to be part of that partnership of providing the solution. But why I also support this committee doing that is, instead of JAC, is because of the unique relationship we do have with the division. And we can work at more thoughtfully with more time, crafting a unique solution, but just recognize that very big picture that we cannot just carve it out and make an exception for the division. That is not an option for this committee to consider, in my view. Otherwise, we destabilize the entire state employee compensation system, which all the directors are getting very excited about for me to say. But we simply just cannot do that.
Committee, any further discussion on the draft? So we can just do a question has been called. We'll go ahead and just do a voice vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no.
Aye.
Hearing none, we will further that on to our next committee meeting for consideration.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, go ahead.
two things. One, just to clarify the ask, so it would essentially be this draft only updating the statutory references. Is that correct? The other potential issue is, as this deals with Title 13 and banking, it would need to go to Minerals. Minerals meets, their last meeting is November 9th and 10th. Our last meeting is November 20th. So there would not be time for Minerals to consider this to sponsor.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Yeah. So the way that, and that's a statutory requirement for those that aren't following along at home, that anything that's in Title 13 go through the Minerals Committee prior to sponsorship. I think what we might end up having to do is have the discussion in this meeting, and if we end up having legislation, we wouldn't be able to sponsor it as a committee bill because it would have to go to the Minerals Committee for that sponsorship. We wouldn't have time, so it would probably be an individual bill, but we can do the work certainly at the meeting through this committee despite that statutory requirement. So I think we continue. No, it actually explicitly in statute, thanks to one of my dear friends from the Minerals Committee from a few years ago, calls for any Title 13 to go through the Minerals Committee explicitly. So I guess we'll continue as consistent with the motion, and we just have to recognize that we wouldn't be able to sponsor it as the select committee. It would be the minerals committee that would have to do that, and they won't have an opportunity to meet unless they have a special meeting or something along those lines.
And I don't believe we have any plans to.
It's fine.
It's fine. For the record, I certainly think that I'm totally fine, especially with those technical positions that generate revenue. I think it's beyond the scope of this committee, but it's certainly warranted to have that discussion across the board, at least for those technical positions. But
Mr. Co-Chairman,
anyway, please, Senator Endicott.
I suggest that we just send this bill to minerals with the amended changes as requested.
Community discussion.
Send it over with a letter. That's good.
Mhm.
Yeah, do both. Yeah.
Let's go ahead and just vote on that just for decorum's sake.
Because it would be adopted.
Correct. As amended. So we're gonna do a roll call vote to send this to minerals. I guess was there a motion? Or no, would we? All right, is the
Mr.
motion?
Yeah, and I'll second it. And
It's
I
seconded.
think that's appropriate to do a roll call vote at that point. So we will, this would be on a motion to adopt that as amended and refer it to the minerals committee for sponsorship. And then we can also still bring it back for discussion at our meeting, which will be ahead of the minerals committee, and we can use that to inform our discussion at the minerals committee. And then we can work with the chairs of the minerals committee to talk through that. So
Absolutely.
that provides a solution. It's an excellent solution, Senator. So, yeah.
And it brings out the absurdity of that rule.
Yeah.
Requiring them to do it.
We could probably even, at this point in time, we could probably even amend the law to change that.
We certainly could.
Shall we get that drafted for next
Yeah,
time?
we're chewing off a lot right now.
It's a one-liner. It's a strike.
So we're about 30
Yeah.
minutes behind, but we're gonna move on.
Let's
to
do
our-
a roll call vote on that.
Oh, sorry, roll call vote, yes.
Senator Alice,
Aye.
Senator Furphy. Senator Nethercott. Representative Andrew.
Aye.
Representative Singh. Representative Yin,
Aye.
Co-Chairman Rothfuss,
Aye.
Chairman Western.
Aye.
8-0, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent. We will confer with the respective chairs of the Joint Minerals Committee. On to our next topic, topic number 4, banking and trust issues. The working group has been working fastidiously over the last couple of months on this issue, certainly with Mr. Revelle, Mr. Land, and others, to put together some legislation for us to consider that really helps delineate some of these bankruptcies, who's in charge of what, and how some of these assets gets treated. And I think while it may not be the most riveting draft, I think that the consequences could be pretty severe and long-term. So I'm really glad we were able to do that. And I really appreciate Mr. Revelle, Mr. Land, and everybody else who has been on this working group, certainly Co-Chair Rothfuss, who's put in a lot of time, and myself. I think all things considered, we've come out with a pretty reasonable product for us to consider. So Mr. Hopkinson, want to maybe come forward and walk us through the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Hopkinson with the Legislative Service Office, walking through 24 LSO 102, working draft 0.4. The first thing to note with this, there is a staff comment just highlighting that this has not been through the entire LSO process, so that there may be some changes that are needed. But walking through the bill itself, it creates a new Article 206 and 13.1.206 and provides that fiduciary and custodial accounts under the administration or management of a financial institution that meet the requirements of subsection B, which we will get to, shall not be deemed assets or liabilities of the financial institution for purposes of any receivership or conservatorship under this title or bankruptcy, receivership, or other similar proceeding under federal law. It further requires that fiduciary and custodial accounts be maintained off balance sheet for accounting purposes. And then provides that this section and other applicable provisions of Title 4, 13, and 34 create an interest in property under state law for the purposes of Title 11 or the bankruptcy code under federal law. Subsection B then provides that fiduciary or custodial accounts should be subject to the following requirements to be covered by subsection A. Requires that the account be governed by a properly documented trust or custodial agreement with clear legal relationship between the institution and the customer. Requires that assets held in the account be properly identified and segregated from the assets and liabilities of the financial institution. And then it requires that the account meet all other applicable requirements of Title IV and some additional Wyoming statutes there. Subsection C provides that is determined by the commissioner that a deposit held by a depository institution with respect to virtual currency shall not be subject to this section. And essentially the language there would apply to the Wyoming stable token. Then it provides definitions of custodial account, which is an account established by that financial institution that does not involve the exercise of substantial discretion, but does involve safekeeping, servicing, and management of customer financial assets. And then the fiduciary account is an account established for which the institution owes a fiduciary duty to a customer that does involve the exercise of substantial discretion, such as investment advice, etc. On page 5, it amends existing statutes, first up in 13.5.417 in the supervised trust statutes. It adds additional language to subsection F, which provides that if the commissioner has been appointed receiver under this section prior to the filing of a petition under Title 11, the commissioner shall be discharged from further duties under the receivership after the resolution of any jurisdictional issues at the commencement of a bankruptcy proceeding. And then we go into the digital assets statute and amend the custodial services section, which provides there a bank may provide custodial services, and there's new language, additional assets, or excuse me, for digital assets. And then we see some stricken language at the bottom of page 5 and leading on to page 6, where it strikes the provisions of the section are cumulative and not exclusive or an optional framework for enhanced supervision of a digital asset custody. And then later on in line 4 strikes under this section and replaces that with for digital assets. On line 8 of page 6, it's just striking depository. In line 17, it's just renumbering P for Q. And then on page 7, amending the definition of custodial services by striking the language there, customer currency and digital assets, and the term includes the exercise of fiduciary and trust powers, and instead replacing that with financial assets, including currency, digital assets, securities, and commodities that do not involve the exercise of substantial discretion. The act would be effective July 1st, 2024. Some other things that I would note for the committee that we may want to include, any potential rulemaking requirements, deadlines on rulemaking. We may want to include a section specifying applicability. Amongst, as I indicated, there may be some additional amendments that are needed that I think we intend to further discuss. But with that, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hopkinson. Members, any question for LSO? Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I was thinking we could turn the floor over to Mr. Reville and have him talk through a little bit of the impetus for it, remind the committee of that. And I think it's in generally good shape, but yeah, rulemaking authority probably needs to happen as necessary.
I would agree. Mr. Revelle, maybe you want.
Thank you,
walk
Mr.
us through this a little
Chairman.
bit?
Could I just check to see if Mr. Evans has been admitted and if we could maybe have him join for this bit of the discussion? I would appreciate his involvement as well.
I'm on Zoom, Mr. Revelle.
Mr. Evans, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine. Please go ahead. Again, state your name and who you're with for the committee.
Sure. My name is Joseph Evans. I'm a partner at McDermott, Will, and Emery. I'm the head of the crypto group here, and I've been doing crypto legal work since 2013. I've also been involved in all of the major crypto bankruptcy cases recently, and I've been helping with this effort to codify the trust agreement and further protect consumers that may custody their digital assets and other assets and with Wyoming financial institutions. And to just explain a little bit why this would be important for creditors in an insolvency situation is that when a company goes bankrupt, or when a trust company or a bank or a Speedy or someone else goes bankrupt, the question as to whether the agreement between customer and company is a trust agreement such that the assets are the customers, or a debtor-creditor relationship such that the assets are property of the estate, is determined by state law. And so codifying the distinction as to when a trust agreement exists and what things the regulated entities need to do to maintain that trust agreement would be quite helpful to creditors in an insolvency situation in virtually all of the crypto bankruptcy cases to date. The assets at issue, with one exception, have been deemed to be property of the estate. And the customers, while they thought they had a wallet or they thought they had assets and crypto that was segregated, they were just treated as unsecured creditors. And so one of the driving forces behind these proposed amendments was to make very clear under state law what constitutes a trust agreement, and what doesn't. And so that was the reasoning, and the interplay between the state law and the federal law is quite important to consider, because while it will be a federal bankruptcy case, if unfortunately this ever happens in Wyoming, the state law will govern the relationship between customer and company.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Revelle, or let's go, Mr. Revelle, and then Mr. Co-Chair. That's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also wanted to quickly acknowledge that unfortunately, Mr. Land was unable to join today, as a minor surgical procedure today, but was instrumental in drafting this language and is part of the working group, and as well, Mr. Kaufman, who's on the working group. And I was going to make a comment, but I'm going to yield to Co-Chairman Rothfuss, who I think had a question.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't have a question. I was just going to state that this is one of those pieces of legislation that, while it doesn't, have a lot of glitz associated with it, ends up being, I think, very important from a regulatory standpoint to provide those bright lines and the clarity that we've been trying to work on in recent years, and anything that we can do to provide that clarity is going to benefit those that choose to operate in the state of Wyoming. So this is, in my view, a great step, even if it's not something that's going to make the front pages of the newspapers.
Mr. Co-Chair, I wholeheartedly agree, because it puts the state in the driver's seat over the feds. While they may certainly control the bankruptcy process, states regulate property rights, which, as it should be. And so I think us kind of drawing pretty clear lines in the sand about this, the nature of this agreement, that it exists in the first place, and mapping it to some of our property rights laws, I think is a great step. Senator. Mr. Revelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to add that there are some additional language modifications that the working group have in front of us right now, and that we'll continue to work with LSO to refine this a bit further. Be happy to have Mr. Evans comment on some high-level substantive changes, but we'll be back with some revised draft as well for the committee to consider.
Thank you, Mr. Revelle. Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One challenge on that is what we discussed a few minutes ago, which is the fact that this does get into Title 13. And so we'll have to give some thought to the process. If they're minor changes and this is generally in good shape, which, I want some honest, thoughtful feedback on that. We could forward it to the Minerals Committee and then potentially make those minor changes at the next meeting of the Minerals Committee. if it needs more so that it would be complicated and that the Minerals Committee would be potentially overwhelmed by it, then we bring it back to this committee for our November meeting, fix it up. And then that would mean it would become an individual bill instead of a committee sponsored bill, which is certainly acceptable. Either of those is just fine. I have no objection to which path, but I get it really does depend on the magnitude of the changes relative to what we have here. And I don't want to see it be a sloppy process where we don't have supportable language going to the Minerals Committee because they're not going to understand it at the same degree we do. So I guess I would just ask the question of which path we should take. And I'm sort of sensing we should probably take the more conservative path and just bring it back to the committee in November, finalize our support for it, and then make it an individually sponsored bill where some of the members of the select committee can sponsor it and bring it forward that way. But I'd like to hear thoughts on that.
Mr. Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, and I'll ask for Mr. Evans to help me here with this answer. I think that there are some proposed changes that are really just clarifying certain activities that would be fairly straightforward and not really change the intent of this original draft. There are some other concepts that were contemplated in the revised language that have to deal with staking and trading and so on that I think would be more substantive and perhaps more complex that I may ask Mr. Evans, if I may, Mr. Chair, to address the proposed changes since they originated from him primarily.
Mr. Evans, would you care to weigh in on that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there are a few areas, proposed revisions, one of which is to discuss this asset segregation issue. Most companies that custody digital assets on behalf of their customers use third-party providers that actually commingle those customer assets with other customer assets, but they are segregated on the books and records of the company and the books and records of the third-party service provider. There has not yet been a case determining whether that commingling is sufficient or not. And so one of the proposed amendments would be to make clear that as long as they're segregated on the books and records of the financial institution and the third-party service provider, that is sufficient to establish a trust account. The second is with respect to staking. Many companies that custody assets, especially digital assets for their customers, participate in staking or have their customers participate in staking. And one way in which we thought to both protect customer assets but allow them to participate in staking is to ensure that if the assets are staked, that the return of those assets goes to exactly where they came from and they don't become commingled with company assets in the process. That's the second. The third is trading. Well, when companies trade their customers' digital assets, they need a place to do so. And so that often happens on crypto exchanges or an OTC desk or other means of trading their assets. And we have attempted to amend the law to make it so that would still be sufficient to establish a trust agreement as long as those assets are only held on those third parties for a very short period of time, sufficient to execute the trades. And they're not sitting on a third-party exchange for a long period of time and therefore exposed to the creditworthiness of that exchange. The final piece is that we proposed some effectively stock language that would codify what a trust account or custodial account or fiduciary account is, such that the agreements between customer and company would have this magic language there. The reason that's important is because one of the tests under the bankruptcy case law is whether the parties intended to create a trust agreement. And so if the magic language is in the trust agreement itself, it helps you on that front too. So those are the items that are before the committee to consider, but aren't in the current draft in front of you today.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Bell, please.
If I might also ask or suggest that we invite Commissioner Bishop to join in this conversation as well. I neglected to thank him at the outset as well for his participation in the working group, and I think that he may be able to
we could take advantage of him being here and opining on some of those additional comments.
Commissioner Bishop, please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Please go ahead.
Yes, I have some prepared comments on what the draft has itself, and obviously, I don't have a whole lot of comments on what Mr. Evans just said. But I'll go through my comments here and hope it provides some help here. So overall, I understand this is a kind of a rough draft at this point. It does need some revision going forward. There's definitely some things I think I most definitely support of this draft. There's also some things I have that are concerns. Overall, I definitely support that the law make it clear that customer digital assets held by a supervised trust company belong to the customer, not the supervised trust company. And I generally support the concept that the bill have some significance, but I have some concerns that, and I think it might be a little complex for exactly what it's trying to do, of just making sure that those trust assets are always separated for company assets. I think this bill does a little bit more than that. Although after hearing Mr. Evans, I think that was the intent, adding some more things like staking and trading onto there. But some of the things I'm aligned on, first, I definitely appreciate that it applies more broadly than just one structure for holding customer or assets to encompass fiduciary accounts as well as custodial agreement. Those definitions, I think, line up very closely to what we've been telling customers and what we have been processing things for quite some time now. I think it's very important for trust companies or anything, or even banks at all times, if it's a trust asset or custodial asset, at no point do those belong to the company. I think that's fairly simple. It's never belongs to the company, and some of these comments I have will maybe help flush some of that out. Second, I agree with the language to effectively delete the optionality from 3429-104. This has always been an option. You have to opt in to that. However, if I had a bank or trust company performing these services and they did not opt into that, I would call that unsafe and unsound practices. So making that, just removing that from the language, I think is a very good step for this draft. Some of the concerns I have is my initial understanding was that this was more geared towards trust companies, so supervised trust companies, not banks. Maybe I'm wrong with that, mostly because banks, they're already exempt from the bankruptcy process. At a federal level, they are handled differently than trust companies are. So given that, if this is mostly geared towards trust companies, just the fact that it's in 13.2.206, I just question that a little bit. A better spot might be within Chapter 5 of Title 13. That's the chapter that addresses trust companies. Whereas if you keep it here, it will apply to all financial institutions, which I think maybe that's on purpose, but that would be banks and SPDIs.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, it is on purpose, and I think there was an understanding in general that it's probably already the case. But I guess the question I would have for you is, do you see any reason why it would hurt? We want to make sure that we're clarifying this to the greatest degree possible, which was kind of how it was being drafted. And there is an expectation that it would already be handled the way we want it to be. But just in case, we thought statutorily having it so that it's applying to all financial institutions would make sure that if we were missing something, there wasn't a problem. And you might not be prepared to answer that now, but that's the thought. And if you see a problem with it, I think it's important for us to understand that problem.
Mr. Bishop.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair. Yeah, generally, I don't object to it being there. I just wanted to make sure that was the intent.
Please continue.
So there's a few things on this bill I might go through. On page 2, line 17 through 19, it uses the phrase "for the purpose of any receivership or conservatorship under this title or a bankruptcy, receivership, or other similar proceeding under federal law." I think this might be a little limiting. Like I said, I think fiduciary and custodial accounts are not assets or liabilities of financial institution for any purposes or at any time. So kind of putting that in there could question whether or not there are other times where it may be considered assets or liabilities of the company.
Mr. Chairman. On that specific point, perhaps the language could be amended to add for any purpose, comma, including, et cetera.
Yeah.
I think the intent was that there be clear, explicit language consistent with federal law so that there was no ambiguity. But I think your point is a good one. So just adding that phrase might be appropriate.
Mr. Bishop.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, either for all purposes or some non-exhaustive list. Not, including but not limited to such and such. The next is on page 2, line 21. This is similar. It says, fiduciary and custodial accounts shall be maintained off balance sheet for accounting purposes. Again, they should not be on the balance sheet at any time. So putting in for accounting purposes, does that maybe somehow limit that there may be other times that they should be off balance sheet? Similar issue as the one before. I just don't know exactly what that what the benefit of having that wording in there is. Next, this bill is definitely designed on a structure for fiduciary and custodial accounts under the administration or management. Again, this is a kind of broad. It could be simplified, I think, for a trust company. Again, no matter what the asset, the customer asset that it holds, it is never an asset or liability of the trust company. Whether you call it a fiduciary account, custodial account, trust account, or anything else, the assets don't belong to the company. So the reality is all assets in any manner held by a supervised trust company are never assets. I keep pounding that because that's very important. Again, that's really much what this is intending to do. So just make sure we go through this and see if there's any ramifications that could call into question. There may be other times that may not be the case. One item. So this bill draft requires the accounts to meet the requirements of subsection B in order to be considered off balance sheet. Again, this is that same issue. What happens if it only meets one of those requirements? Does it have to be all those requirements? I think, again, at any time, I don't think those assets should ever be considered assets. So if it fails one of those 3 items, I think it's 3 and B. Does that mean it doesn't apply?
Mr. Co-Chair, I certainly think, and that's a valid point, but I think we can wordsmith it to where it includes all or some. Is kind of what would be my immediate reaction to that concern, to ensure that we're not, the Commissioner's point, muddying the waters in other areas of what's already established, but also making sure that clarifying language is in there. Mr. Co-Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it was my understanding that this was being structured as sort of a legal threshold to be compliant with the federal law. So my question would be, was it intended to be an or was it intended to be an and, based on ensuring that we have the same, that we're working within what federal law would allow us to work within? I guess I'd look to Joel or Mr. Evans on that one to find out whether we want that to be an and or an or to achieve the objective.
Mr. Veller, or should we go to Mr. Evans?
Yeah, I would say, this was drafted by Chris Land, who's unfortunately not here, but I would defer to Mr. Evans, who may have an opinion on that could help us.
Mr. Evans.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The idea was that all of the provisions under B have to be met in order to establish a trust account and then protect the customers in a bankruptcy situation. That was the thought process. And that under subsection B is where the proposed provisions about staking and trading and commingling would be too. And so that is a section that would dictate what you need to do in order to have a trust account.
So, Mr. Chairman, to clarify, if you were to fail any of those provisions, then you would not be deemed a trust company in the bankruptcy. You would not achieve that clear trust relationship that is trying to be described. Is that accurate?
Mr. Evans.
Mr. Chairman, that was the idea with this particular draft, that those are the elements that must be hit in order to maintain trust relationship. The draft is still underway, as you know, but that was the idea.
Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Evans. Mr. Bell, go for it.
Yeah, and I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Co-Chairman, you said deemed to be a trust company. I just want to clarify that what we're defining here is an agreement, a trust agreement, not a company. Yeah.
Thank you.
And then a small but important distinction. So,
Yeah, I just have a few left. I can go through them very quickly if that's okay.
well, I mean, Mr. Bishop, I think your input here is really important in this. And so it's 11:58. My thought, I think when I confer with my co-chair is maybe just hitting a pause on this, and then we'll just gavel back in after lunch and kind of just pick up where we left off. And absent any objection, Mr. Bell.
My only objection may be if we lose Mr. Evans.
But
who
Mr.
is
Evans, are you?
Obviously my crutch here, all things legal.
Mr. Evans, what's your schedule like?
Thank you. I'm available, so I can come back after lunch if that would be helpful.
Excellent. Fantastic. So it is almost noon on the dot. Coach, what do you think? 1 or 1:30?
1:30 is what's on the agenda.
All right, 1:30 it is. We'll see you guys back here at 1:30. And hopefully start on time.